Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 98 of Through the Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. My name is Trevor Game, joined as always by the co-host, Matt Feuerstein. Matt, we finally made it to another one of those milestone episodes. I guess every episode recently has been a milestone episode, since this is technically part of Ring of Honor's milestone series, but this is one of those episodes where had this episode in mind since the start. Like, what if we got here? This is going to be a big episode.
Oh, I thought you meant that it was a milestone episode because it's episode 98 and your favorite musicians are 98 Degrees, the famous group featuring Nick Lachey. And I know how much you love Nick Lachey.
I thought you were going to say 98, the last year I was happy.
No, you were not happy in 98. Don't even try it.
We probably met each other online, only a couple years after that? 99,
I
2000?
feel like by 99 we had at least crossed paths, even if we didn't consider us people that we knew personally.
Yeah. The young days, but it's ironic.
But not the happy days. No, they were still tough. You know, growing up's not easy these days. You know what I mean? Or those days. Those days were not these days. Anyone still listening?
And ironically, not ironically, but just, it's funny that we talk about 98, those were days. I was thinking, those were so long ago. We're talking about 2006. That's now at a point where that's long ago, the show we're covering today. So
yes, the sad part about 2006 is we were already grown-ass adults. And it was a really long time ago. It just means we've been adults for a long time, and that sucks.
Not fun at all. But what was fun was Supercard of Honor, which took place March 31st, 2006 at the Frontier Fieldhouse in Chicago.
Spoiler alert, you said it was fun. Spoilers.
Spoiler, this is not going to get a negative review, but at the Frontier Fieldhouse in Chicago Ridge, Illinois, in front of a reported crowd of 1,200 fans. So, Matt, I think this is the first time I ever went to this as a source, but Kerry Silkin, the former owner of Ring of Honor and recent recipient of a Chris Jericho beatdown that he no-sold completely on AEW, he has a podcast he does on and off. Again, they do it in kind of a season format where they'll do a bunch of episodes, then take some time off, with a current Ring of Honor commentator, Ian Riccoboni. It's called Last Stop Penn Station. He tells a law story. It's just not about Ring of Honor, just about his crazy life, but he also has some Ring of Honor tidbits here or there. And there was something he mentioned about this show, which I thought was really interesting, especially if you are if you are a deep vein thrombozo, as we like to call you, fans of the show. You will, if you've listened to all the episodes and known some of the stuff we've talked about, this is struck me as really interesting. This is Kerry talking about this event, Supercard of Honor, on the podcast. He says, under my ownership, this triple shot were some of our best shows. And then he went on to say, Matt, and I quoted it verbatim, this is the only weekend where we actually had a solid profit all time. And Ian's almost wondering, are you joking? He's like, no, this is literally these two shows in Chicago were the only time that when I owned the company that we ever turned a solid profit. And I have to assume he means a solid profit when you just factor in live gate and live merchandise sales, because you have to think a show like Joe versus Kobashi, which sold a ton of DVDs, if you couldn't turn a profit on that. But Kerry continues talking about, he was knowing how impressive that was also with this show, because he was saying, this was not a cheap show to book because it was in the Midwest, so a lot of flights. And he also said, quote, the Dragon Gate guys don't come cheap. And he mentions that the merch sold really well. And he says it took that kind of crowd to really make some money. And if you've been listening to our show, you have followed the saga of so many times the word Ring of Honor would put in its early years to both the Pro Wrestling Torch and the Wrestling Observer would be somewhere between 400 and 500 fans. If we do that many fans for a live show, we basically break even, and then all the profit is made through DVD sales. And here you have Kerry Silkin basically saying that it took two of the biggest attendances he ever had to turn a solid profit.
So I'm guessing the break even was a little bit higher than they made it out to be. So, I mean, he said in his ownership of the company. Now, I don't know if that means his full ownership or when he first got involved, because he first got involved in mid-03? ish. Does that sound right? Like when he first
Yeah, it
had a
was
stake
right
in the
after
company?
if I remember, it was Mike Johnson wrote in kind of his eulogy of God, passing his name,
Doug
Doug
Gentry?
Gentry. Yeah, that because he was putting over Doug Gentry for being the guy that kind of hooked Ring of Honor up with Kerry Silkin. They said, I believe Mike Johnson said that if it wasn't for Kerry Silkin, Ring of Honor's last show would have been Night of Champions in 2003, which was when Joe won the title. So yeah, that would
Yeah.
have been just a few months into 2003. He comes in.
Right. So that's when he comes in. And when he finally fully gets ownership of the company, I don't think is really till like mid 2004, right? So I guess it's possible that those shows in 2002 did have like 400, 500 break evens, and I don't think they ever did 400 and 500 in 2002, right? From what I recall at the Murphy
Yeah.
Rec Center. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that a lot of these ROH shows lost money, at least pre-DVD sales.
Yeah, which again completely flies in the face of what they had been telling us, the public, which is basically, oh, most of these shows break even on the live gate, and
Yeah, but we were always very skeptical of that.
although I will say the break even point or make a profit point was probably less than the crowds they drew for these shows because, like I just said, like Carrie noted, even these shows probably cost more than the average shows to book with the amount of talent they were using.
That's fair too.
They were even flying in guys like Julius Smokes. Some of the managers they wouldn't always bring to the Midwest. Like they were bringing everyone for the show, the women, everybody.
And of course, they like you mentioned before, the 6 guys from Dragon Gate. Which, that's, even if you can get one guy for a pretty good deal, there's 6 of them.
But that's something also, I guess, that doing a triple shot allows you to do a bit more. Because I know, like, with stuff like Chikara's King of Trios or PWG's Battle of Los Angeles, which has sometimes been like a 3-day thing, the idea of if we book a double or a triple shot, one of our biggest talent costs is travel. Well, you kind of spread out some of the travel costs. You're going, well, we then get to book these guys for 3 shows instead of buying this expensive plane ticket and getting 1 show out of them. So I imagine that was probably some of the logic too. Like, okay, we're going to really splurge for the Dragon Gate guys for 6 of them, but we're going to get 3 shows out of them if we fly them all down here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's very smart, and I think it probably paid off pretty well.
Yeah, and again, I think we mentioned on the last show, but I think even though this was not the first time Ring of Honor kind of piggybacked on WrestleMania weekend, I feel like just reading back on like the media coverage of reaction to these attendances and all that, this was really the weekend, starting with this show and the next show, that kind of did a big flashing neon sign to the wrestling world to start like, hey, it's a good idea to just run wherever WrestleMania is the days before WrestleMania happens. Like, as you were talking about last time, once they start to move to stadiums, particularly, WrestleMania becomes this giant kind of destination event every year where you're going to almost guaranteed to get people from around the world, all sorts of stuff. But
they had done it in 2004. They did At Our Best, and of course, the next show they're playing off that name. It's going to be called Better Than Our Best, but yeah, like that was a one-off thing, and it was. Like, it got people's attention, but it wasn't like this all-out extravaganza that, everybody was talking about the way this double shot or triple shot, if you want to count Detroit, was. And so, like, yeah, the tradition really did begin here. And, ROH, I think, ran WrestleMania weekend shows pretty much every year for many, many years after this consecutively. And I don't know if it was by the next year, but within a few years, there were a lot of companies doing it. I know, like, more Chicago-oriented groups did it in 2006 too, right? Like, obviously, IWA Mid-South did it. They ran some shows that weekend. I don't think Shimmer did, but I don't remember for sure. Did they? Did Shimmer run WrestleMania weekend?
My memory of that stuff is awful. I was just going to say, I think the only, like, notable, at least for people like us, like, indie that ran other than Ring of Honor here on this WrestleMania weekend in 2006 was IWA Mid-South the next day ran like an afternoon show, and that was the one that had the famous low-key Necro Butcher match. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, there wasn't really many companies like taking advantage, especially, again, one of the advantages would be if you could run those shows. You look at the WrestleMania week shows now where indies kind of, again, you're saving on travel costs because so much talent is in the town. You don't have to really pay for trans. They probably could have gotten a bunch of these other indies probably could have gotten, an extra show out of some of these guys, and a lot of talent in here just from these Ring of Honor shows alone. But
yeah, I don't blame any indie for running WrestleMania weekend. I think it's a smart thing to do, but there is some nostalgia I have for the day when there was just like a few really special shows that everybody talked about, and not just like 1,000 different indie shows.
I agree. And also I don't think you're getting the best out of the guys, because so often you hear these stories. It's, guys, some of these guys are working like 5 or 6 matches in 2 or 3 days. And sometimes you hear these stories about, like they had to like drive across town and they barely got to the show, or like they're working their match and has to go on early so that they can get to the other booking they have for that evening. Like at that point, you can't possibly be in a position to put on your very best work, because, stamina, just the frenzy of, you're not just sitting in one locker room all day kind of getting ready. You're just rushing everywhere just to kind of take as many bookings as you possibly can fit in.
And some shows are like early in the morning, and some shows are super late at night. Like, aren't there always, in the recent years, at least pre-pandemic, I don't know if they've gone back to it, these big shows that'll start at like midnight for some of these indies nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of those Joey Janela spring breaks, I remember like watching that online at home and I'm feeling tired. I think I heard someone saying like, oh, there's a couple people like falling asleep here, like during the main, like maybe like during Great Sasuke versus Joey Janela. Not a slight on the match, but just again, that's the other thing to think about when you run so many shows, as opposed to this Ring of Honor show. We'll get to it later, but in the main event, people are talking about the idea of, oh, maybe crowd getting a little burnt out at the end. Like, you watch these WrestleMania week shows now where some of these fans, by the time they get to that main show at night, that might be their second or even third show they're attending that day.
And for some of them, even more than that. Like, I mean, I had friends stay with me for WrestleMania weekend, for WrestleMania 35 in 2019, which, is in like, New York, New Jersey. And they definitely on some of the days went to like 4 shows, like I seem to recall. So yeah, and then we'll get up early the next morning and go back for more. So I didn't do that. Like, I just don't have it in me to do that. But but yeah, it's not like there are some nuts out there that are willing to do it. But when you talk about, when you talk about like the stamina of the wrestlers, like I remember even watching this and being like, how does Bryan Danielson do this match and then another one the next night? And that's like 2 matches, because by his standards, not saying he took it easy at Dragon Gate Challenge, but like by his standards, he kind of did, but it was like, certainly on this show and the following show, he sure didn't. And he wasn't the only one. Those Dragon Gate guys also definitely, and the Generation Next guys all, worked really hard all the nights. And they just kept coming back for more. And that's just 3. Nowadays, like you said, some of these guys work with what? Like, what is like the maximum that some of these guys work nowadays? Guys and women. Like,
I'm not sure, but
like 7, 8 matches over a couple of days.
I mean, again, it depends how hard you want to hustle, but you can do a lot on some of these shows if you have a certain amount of name value, and I'm probably are willing to like work at a certain rate, It's funny you mentioned that. I guess the last thing about this I was going to say is just, you are right that like people, it almost seems, in some ways it seems quaint that we're talking about, like 3 shows in a row. That's crazy. Like when WrestleMania weekend, that's way different, like way more than 1 show a night for 3 nights in a row. But I can also see a different segment of people going, like looking at us, knowing that like WWE has scaled back house shows, and AEW guys working there who are getting paid are literally complaining about like not getting enough work. Like people going, wow, Grandpa, when you were young, there was literally like a wrestlers worked 3 days in a row, like instead of once a week. Like it's crazy how much things have changed in just 16 years. Where when I was coming up, like I remember there were some people going like, wrestlers who just work Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, they're not going to develop the right way because they need to be like in the old territory days where they're working 5 days a week on a loop. And now like working Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for a lot of wrestlers, I think would seem like kind of like a packed schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just things are ever changing. It doesn't seem like we're ever going to go backwards. Even if, some of the aspects of the old ways were better, and I'm sure definitely some of them are worse. But, I think it's just a lot of just the business, just like everything, keeps evolving and adapting. And that's why we need to bring back Evolve. Right, Gabe? Come on, Gabe. Under the WWE banner, let's do it.
I was going to say that ship seems to have sailed, but maybe not. Who knows?
Maybe everything old is new again.
So the Observer
Although,
had one
you
little...
know, just sorry to keep like tangent, but like
No,
it
go
would
on.
be funny if, you know, WWE brought back Evolve and it became much more like robust than AEW's version of ROH.
I mean, at this point, with Ring of Honor not having TV, it wouldn't be hard. Like if you just had like a weekly
Exactly, yeah.
show on the network, or I guess Peacock now.
As of now, and you know, as of this recording, all ROH and AEW is a bunch of titles on the regular AEW shows, and then like a pay-per-view once every 4 to 6 months. It's not really a proper promotion or even like offshoot promotion in any way. So if they wanted to do that with Evolve, they could.
Going to the Observer, Dave had a quick note about this particular show. He wrote, Jamie Noble, Rene Dupree, and Paul London all went to this Ring of Honor show in Chicago. CM Punk had said he was going to go there, but he wasn't there. Matt, this is the craziest CM Punk controversy I've ever heard. Why was he not at the show? We have to find out.
He was getting ready to be one of John Cena's gangsters during his entrance.
I don't know how much prep that takes, but I could definitely see if they wanted to do like any kind of like rehearsal the day before.
Rehearsal, and they had to like fit him. Although it's not like those gangster suits really fit so well for all those guys. But yeah,
I would love you could have seen the Dragon Gate 6-man, but I had to get fit for a zoot suit, Matt. But we opened the show, as usual, for the Milestone Series, picking up right where the last show ended with a cliffhanger, in this case with Jim Cornette backstage having just got off the phone with a mystery informant who has told him that the identity of the mysterious person who knocked out his tooth in that huge melee at a few shows where the wrestlers were trying to throw Necro Butcher and Chris Hero out of the locker room after they invaded the show. Cornette says he was just told it was Low Ki. He calls Low Ki a little boy and says Ki is always making ridiculous demands, whining and crying. And Jim adds, I told Ring of Honor before that I didn't think they needed Low Ki to begin with. And he says, now I know we don't need him. Cornette says Ki disfigured him, carelessly hitting him by accident in that brawl when he was trying to strike anybody else. And as a result, Cornette says, I can't believe this. Cornette says, as a result of Low Ki, let me be clear, Matt, accidentally hitting Jim Cornette gives Low Ki a lifetime ban from Ring of Honor. He then adds that's life plus 99 years or until his tooth grows back. So this is the first of two instances on this show of Cornette trying to do something that he was known for, and I appreciate when Ring of Honor tries to do this, of trying to give everything a storyline explanation, but both times on the show it failed. And I will just say this, think about it this way. It makes Cornette look like an asshole where Low Ki, I think, Cornette even acknowledges Low Ki did not try and hit him. It was an accidental strike in a wild melee. And then, or melee, let's also
either way is fine, pronunciation wise. Yes,
but Matt, here's the big thing. Let's think about this recently. Just a few shows earlier, Homicide tried to murder Colt Cabana by pouring Drano drain cleaner down his throat to the point where Colt has since acted like he has PTSD and I could have died. All this stuff, and Cornette suspended both of them for what, one or two shows in storyline, and Low Ki accidentally knocks out one of Cornette's teeth. Lifetime ban.
It's funny because I misremembered this because I had always remembered it as Cornette finds out that Low Ki attacked him and knocked out his teeth, and then it would make more sense. And they could have just said that. What would have been the harm in saying that, right? Yeah. So it makes Cornette seem way worse. But I guess you could argue they were planting the seeds for Cornette's heel turn over the summer if they were thinking that far ahead. Which I don't know if Gabe was thinking that far ahead, but it does play into that. Yeah, that is a dick move by Cornette. Not that, Low Ki, the character, deserved the benefit of the doubt. But the other thing that stood out to me, of all the angles where someone says there's a lifetime suspension, I think this one came really close because October 1st, 2022, Low Ki was never back in Ring of Honor as of this recording. Now, I guess ROH, to the extent that it exists, I guess he could end up coming back. You never know.
Well, I will give. I mean, you know this, Matt. I will just say I have talked to somebody within AEW, someone pretty high up.
Pretty high up, huh?
And literally asked them if they could book Low Ki versus Christopher Daniels versus Bryan Danielson one more time, the original Ring of Honor main event.
Pretty high up, and you thought they could book this match, huh? Interesting.
And they sounded like they were the chances of booking Low Ki were slim. So,
well, I'm just saying it's still physically possible that it could happen. Physically possible. That's all I'm saying. So I don't want to say anything in absolute terms, but it seems like this lifetime suspension for this whoopsie that Low Ki apparently made has held.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is crazy that it is, unintentionally, because, there have been multiple ownerships since this happened, but yet you have to think if Low Ki really had wanted to come back for like a show, if he had been willing to play ball, like, I have to think he could have gotten a shot somewhere with Ring of Honor, like even for a one-off, like just like an anniversary show, something, because he's the first champion,
Yeah, I mean, there is a little bit too, like, Low Ki's stock dropped a little bit after he left ROH. Like, he did some good stuff, and he was like good in TNA, and he had a little run in WWE where he had a couple of good matches and stuff, but it's not like he was ever the talk of the wrestling world anywhere out after this. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's not like he was like this, like, oh, we got to get Low Ki back. Like, I bet he would have been good, but there wasn't a buzz to get Low Ki back really at any point that I can remember.
Next, we get a highlight video of the Bryan Danielson-Roderick Strong feud, hyping their main event match on tonight's show. It's another highlight package that just feels like it goes on forever. Like, I feel bad kind of criticizing these because clearly whoever did the recent video packages like this one and the Joe Daniels one we saw on the last show put a lot of work into getting a ton of clips. But the problem is it's like they got so many clips and they just decide we're using them all, and it just goes on and on and on. But
diminishing returns. I did think this one was a little bit less over the top than the one the night before. Like, it was a little bit more palatable. Like, and I thought it was better. But yeah, it did suffer from the same exact conceptual problem.
And we then cut to Chris Hero interacting with a group of fans outside the building in a segment that an on-screen graphic tells us took place earlier today. Hero gets into it with a couple of sassy, badass women, it's the only way I can describe it, who ain't taking a shit. One tries to actually slap Hero. Hero, she misses, and then Hero says, miss me, now you gotta kiss me, which I have probably not heard since I was like 8 years old, which was like a throwback line. And then she then flips Hero off. Hero mocks the crowd's intelligence and is quickly cut off as we go to the next segment.
When you say quickly cut off, like, that's a understatement. They cut away. He wasn't cut off. The clip cut away in the mid-sentence. It was very strange. It reminded me a lot of those early Hit Squad clips from the first few ROH shows where they're just like outside talking to people on a bus. Like, but I did think it was very strange that they cut away from him mid-sentence.
Yeah, it's almost like, did something else happen or something? Like, yeah. I get we should ask somebody, like, were those women, like, just really fans? Because they were very charismatic and not afraid to, like, I mean, did they tell them, like, hey, try and slap Chris and we're going to shoot this second? Or because they were very bold and entertaining. So
I bet you that was probably the extent of it. If there was anything more to it than them just being fans with somebody, like, right before just being like, hey, like, really give it back to him or something like that,
Yeah. Next, we go backstage to join Blood Generation. Shima tells us Dragon Gate is the cutting edge of pro wrestling. Just a very quick segment.
I love these Blood Generation promos. They're just fun.
We've seen way worse from people that do not speak that speak English as a first language. So, kudos to them. Their charisma comes across even with the language barrier.
And it's mainly a SEMA promo, but those other guys, they're looking cool in the background.
Then we get the top 5 rankings, the same one we've gotten the last couple days.
I'm assuming that the next show will be different because it is officially April. Starting on the very next DVD, even though it's only 1 day later.
It will be exciting if it is, because as of now, it is still 5 Samoa Joe, 4 Alex Shelley, 3 Christopher Daniels, 2 Jimmy Yang, 1 Roderick Strong. And now we finally go to Inside the Ring, live for the event, where Bobby Cruz welcomes the crowd. Cruz announces that due to a concussion suffered last night, Colt Cabana is unable to compete this evening because he was scheduled for an official match with Homicide on this night. That gets a lot of boos from the hometown Chicago crowd. Bobby then introduces Commissioner Jim Cornette, who comes out with a baseball bat, and B.J. Whitmer, who is walking with crutches and his newly injured foot from the last show is in some kind of cast. Cornette gets in the ring. He asks the crowd if there's anyone here who has never seen Ring of Honor in person before, which gets a pretty loud reaction. He then asks if there's anyone who has seen Ring of Honor before and loved it so much they came back tonight. That gets an even larger pop. He tells the older fans to welcome the new fans, make them feel at home. And then Cornette says this is the biggest two-night stand in Ring of Honor history. He alludes to WrestleMania happening, on Sunday, which gets a lot of boos, actually, which I have a feeling, again, that's something that would change. Like, if you allude to WrestleMania now and on most indie shows, you probably get a lot of people cheering or at least not booing. Cornette says that WrestleMania is like two dogs screwing on the side of the road. You have to watch it for a minute. I would say you don't have to do that, but anyway.
The funniest part of that is, I feel like in this era, like the mid-2000s, WrestleMania was usually like pretty good, whereas I think in a lot of like the 2010s and 2020s, like it was maybe more the 2010s and 2020s, but it was often like boring. Like, so it's just weird that like there was more animosity toward WWE shows back then when the events were of higher wrestling quality, in my opinion, anyway.
That's a fascinating point I didn't think of, especially because when you think about, like, there was a lot of, we'll get to a commentary thing, even animosity, like, the wrestling in WWE was way better back then, I would say, in my opinion.
At least on the big shows. I don't know about week to week, because I don't really, maybe I'll start giving it another chance again, but I, the big shows, like I watched a lot of the WrestleMania. I've seen like every WrestleMania, and I feel pretty strongly that the 2000s, like from let's say 2001 through like 2010-ish, there were a couple of stinkers in there, but that was the best era for WrestleMania in the ring, like by far. So it's just weird to see how everyone treats it like it was like, I don't know, like hokey Hulk Hogan shit, when it really wasn't. Like, it was often pretty good.
Yeah, maybe it's just standards change. Maybe a lot of these fans got run off. I mean, who knows? But either way, Cornette definitely puts over Ring of Honor. He riles the crowd up. Cornette says B.J. Whitmer has a broken ankle. This is, I'm about to describe a broken ankle. And he says, but it didn't happen as part of the wrestling matches. It happened in the parking lot after the show when CZW wrestlers jumped him and slammed a door on his ankle. Jim says B.J. will be out for weeks. So before I get to the rest of this, I just have to stop right there. I just said a few minutes ago, Cornette tried to explain two different angles, and this is by far the biggest offender. I get, like, in wrestling, the classic wrestling logic is whenever someone gets legit hurt, say a heel did it to try and transfer that legit injury into heel heat. That's great logic, except when everyone just saw the guy break his ankle and they know it's insane that they tried to sell this as, oh, he didn't break his ankle when he did one of the most notable botched moves in Ring of Honor history and literally was clutching his ankle with Gabe running to him right after the match and saying, my ankle's fucked. No, it happened when the CZW wrestlers slammed his leg in a car door. Like, come on.
Here's how much of an ROH loyalist I am. I know that Jim Cornette was not involved in the booking of ROH at this point, and I know that Gabe Sapolsky was the booker of ROH, and yet I'm still like, I bet Gabe didn't think of that. I bet Cornette told him to say that. Because it's so, old school, but, yeah, obviously it's ridiculous. It was like anybody who saw the show the night before, which is most people watching on DVD, I'm going to assume, or at least a high percent of them, would have seen or at least know about that Jimmy Jacobs spot. So, yeah, that's very silly and comes across hokey.
Yeah. Jim says, I already said that BJ will be out a few weeks. Cornette then introduces his baseball bat, Velma Lou, in case CZW wrestlers want to start trouble this weekend. Cornette then says he went to the seedy parts of Chicago. He asked Gary Hart where the peep shows were, and he found the two roughest, toughest hardcore wrestlers in the city of Chicago to give them a chance to show their skills here in Ring of Honor. He introduces them, and out come two masked men with plunder, coming out to the classic CZW theme. One of them is actually holding a broom. It's not Kenny Omega. Cornette wants them to help clear up the misconception that hardcore wrestlers are secretly gay. He then makes a blowjob joke, and then he makes a joke about the difference between a hardcore wrestler's sister and a rooster. He says a rooster says cock-a-doodle-doo. A hardcore wrestler's sister says any cock will do. Cornette then says he asked the Ring of Honor wrestlers if they wanted to wrestle these two hardcore wrestlers. Some of the Ring of Honor wrestlers were really scared, but he found two guys that were willing to do it. Cornette brings out Samoa Joe and Adam Pearce. That gets our first, I guess, technically official match. Adam Pearce and Samoa Joe defeated hardcore wrestlers 1 and 2, who I should note were Pele Primo and Rhett Titus under masks, in 58 seconds when Pearce pinned hardcore wrestler 1 after he got hit with a Samoa Joe muscle buster and a top rope slash from Adam Pearce. That is the segment, Matt. The crowd loved this segment. I think there is way more bad than good to this. I don't think it ages well. Not just the dumb gay joke, but just, we already talked about the BJ Whitmer thing, and just the general vibe of it leaned too much into the Jim Cornette grandpa's joke book kind of material. And also, I will say this is another, we've talked about this a lot, this is another one of those segments where Ring of Honor kind of seems like the bad guy in the CZW feud, like the bully, like instead of just like challenging the CZW wrestlers, they dress up a couple poor students and like have the wrestlers beat them up while like they mock them. Like that feels like something the heel side of a feud would do.
It feels like something WWE would do. The crowd loves seeing Joe especially, but like to me, Joe being involved in this made Joe look really bad. Like this sucked. Like this is was the worst thing on an ROH DVD in a while, probably since the Jade Chung stuff that ended months earlier. It had like the worst. Cornette, had a lot of charisma. He very good delivery, but like the worst with the homophobia and like then the dumb like dick jokes and all that stuff. And then this is like it's like a page out of the WWE playbook where they put out some poor schlub and they have them get their asses kicked, and it's like, oh look, these are the hardcore wrestlers, and I don't know what they were trying to accomplish here, other than just getting Joe out there at the beginning to kick ass. But I feel like Joe should be above this stuff. Like someone should have been like, this doesn't make us look good. And I think it's very weird to have a show like this right in the middle of like one of ROH's best runs that begins with something on the lower end of segments that ROH has ever put on, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I also don't like it, anytime Jim Cornette, they work this feud where he kind of makes Joe or any big Ring of Honor star kind of seem like a subservient henchman to him. Right? Sometimes, if you want to put an Adam Pearce in that role, that's fine. But there are times in this feud where it feels like the feud isn't Ring of Honor versus CZW. It's Jim Cornette versus CZW. And the Ring of Honor guys are kind of just like his chess pieces to wager this battle. I found a couple guys. Like, Samoa Joe's the biggest star in the company.
Yeah, it's better. With the promo that Joe cut the night before was really good. And that should really be the voice that they're bringing against CZW. Not Cornette's. I get the impulse to make him the voice because he's one of the greatest talkers in wrestling history, but it's just not the right fit, I don't think. Whatever, I'm saying this, and obviously the angle worked very well and it's a long time ago, but just from an artistic standpoint, as good as this whole thing was, I think Cornette in a lot of situations does bring it down. By the way, you mentioned Grandpa's joke book. Keep in mind Jim Cornette was 44 here.
I know. That's the other thing. He was corny, no pun intended, from a very early age. The other thing I want to mention is during that one-man squash, I actually have a note where there's a moment where there's a large plastic tub for or bucket or something for plunder that the masked guys in the ring, and Pearce kicks it and it hits the handheld cam guy right in the camera, which is actually a really neat shot. But this is going to be a bad night for ringside employees. We'll get to later. But I also like that we've talked about the weird cognitive dissonance of like Jim Cornette always talked about, like, you know, Ring of Honor is not for hardcore with all these examples. Even Dave Meltzer was starting to pick up at this point because he wrote in his recap from the live notes, the first night opened with a Cornette promo claiming he was keeping a baseball bat with him at all times because he hated hardcore wrestling. I know there is irony there, Dave writes. Like, you know, I'm going to fend off this hardcore wrestling with a weapon, but that brings us to the first real match of the night. A four-corner survival. Ricky Reyes defeated Delirious, Flash Flanagan, and Shane Hagedorn in 6 minutes, 54 seconds when he made Delirious tap to the Dragon Sleeper. Matt, this was obviously continuing a storyline, like a little one triple shot storyline that Ring of Honor, I guess I couldn't find it on the Wayback Machine because the Wayback Machine's really unreliable at this point, but I've seen from other reports that if my memory serves, the Ring of Honor storyline during this period was them saying Delirious has to win basically a match on this triple shot, or he's, you know, the classic Gabe storyline of this guy's good, but he's not winning and he has to get a win soon or he's going to be out of a job here. And, you know, he's down to his last shot after this match. But what did you think about the match itself?
Yeah, and wasn't it also like that Hagedorn was sort of a last-minute replacement for Jimmy Jacobs, who was moved into the Joe match after Whitmer hurt himself? Is that correct?
Actually, I did not go back that deep, but that makes a lot of sense because, yeah, Jacobs moves up the card to make up for Whitmer. So, yeah, that makes sense, especially because this does not feel like the kind of match they would just slot a student in. So I bet your memory is correct there.
And it's got to be tough for, like, you know, a student, you know, we could ask Shane, but like to like be put into a four-way match, you know, on a big show, because I imagine that four-ways in some ways are harder to put together because there's just a lot of different moving parts. So I thought that Hagedorn did a good job considering, you know, he's sort of put in the role to take a lot of Delirious's silliness and like sell how ridiculous it is. And I think he does a good job of that. The other thing, very notable, Flash Flanagan, who was, I don't think he's ever been in ROH as Flash Flanagan, right? Like, wasn't he like, he was, what was he from?
Slash Venom or something like that? Right?
And maybe something else too. Maybe, was he one of the weapons of mass destruction?
I think so, in fact, because, I think when I was looking at like the torture side, they said this was Flash Flanagan's debut in Ring of Honor, but this is actually his third Ring of Honor match, just his first as himself. Yeah.
Yeah, and anyway, he's enormous compared to everybody else. Like, just so tall. Like that was one of the biggest impressions that you get. And like he's not taking Delirious's shit the way, you know, Hagedorn did. But they end up doing a lot of big moves, and we get a decent amount of stuff with Delirious versus Reyes, which I guess makes sense because it's going to set up the match the night after, I should say, where, you know, spoilers, Delirious beats Reyes. But you know, the way you look on this show, it feels like, you know, they haven't given up Reyes' push because he gets the win, but I guess it's more to set up Delirious beating him. As far as the match itself, I thought it had promise when it started. Delirious at the beginning of these shows is always a lot of fun. I thought that the finishing stretch didn't really have like a lot of pop to it, I guess, that sometimes these four-ways can, but it didn't overstay its welcome. So I thought that it was all right, you know, not a particularly good match, not particularly memorable, but they did all right, I guess.
Yeah, I thought this was average at best. I mean, it was watchable. The main thrust of the match was Delirious's comedy, very over here, you know, still fresh to the crowds. He was a guy on the rise at this point. The one notable spot I thought in this match was Hagedorn gets clotheslined over the top rope, and he like flips over the top rope and then lands on the apron, like on the edge of the apron, knees first, which just looked like it sucked. Like, I don't know if I've ever seen a guy like take like the Cactus Jack, like kind of flip over the ropes clothesline bump, taking it, not giving it. And you land, instead of landing on your feet or landing on the floor, you just take it on your knees. You probably did not mean to do that. I was just like, man, I bet you that hurt a lot. But after the match, Reyes refuses to release the sleeper for a few seconds, and then Julius Smokes attacks Delirious, and then Reyes puts him back in the Dragon Sleeper for a little while longer. Reyes grabs the mic, and he calls Delirious a fucking moron and tells him he doesn't belong here in Ring of Honor. He slaps
and then Smokes calls an audience member an Oreo cookie a bunch of times.
He slaps Delirious hard in the face over and over and draws some heat there. Delirious tries to fight back, but to no avail. Reyes and Smokes beat him down, and they tear at the tassels on his mask even. And then Smokes tells the camera that Cabana is next. So, yeah, just, continuing for the next night.
Basic stuff. I was thinking, maybe he meant to call Delirious an Oreo cookie because he thought instead of Delirious that his name was Delicious. Because then he would definitely be an Oreo cookie.
This is making me hungry, Matt. God damn, we still have like 2 hours to go.
You have any Oreos?
I actually do, believe it or not. I've had them in the cover for like a month. Maybe I'll finally get to them. But
do it.
I like that. Do it. That encouragement. We cut to Chad Collier backstage. He says the last time he and Ace Steel were here in this city, he hit Ace with a chair and never saw so much blood in his life. Collier keeps laughing about the blood. He also says that Ace pissed himself and bled for weeks. Just the idea of that made me laugh. I just wrote my notes at this point. Chad Collier is insane and awesome. Collier says tonight it happens again. It's a first blood match between him and Steele. And he said, Collier adds, he's never bled in his career and he won't tonight. I wonder if that's true or not, because I could definitely see that being true, because Collier is not a blood match kind of guy, to the best of my knowledge. But I am not a Collier completist, Matt, so I have no idea if that is true or not.
I don't know. A wrestler said it in a promo, so it's probably true.
And that cuts. We go then to Ace Steel cutting a backstage promo. Ace says August 2005 was supposed to be a special night for him. Getting to see CM Punk and Colt Cabana, his two students, wrestle on Punk's final night in Ring of Honor. Ace was hoping to go get a burger with them after the show, but it didn't work out that way, thanks to Chad Collier. Ace says he has never bled so much in his entire life, not even coming out of his mother's womb, which I should note, that's not your blood.
Yeah, the baby's not the one that's supposed to be bleeding when that happens.
Although I will actually say I did bleed. Not when I was carrying on my mom's womb. I was a cesarean birth, and the doctor in the frenzy, because I had like an umbilical cord wrapped around my throat, I was turning purple. He accidentally sliced my eyelid open with like a scalpel. So I actually got a blade job, Matt, coming out of my mom's belly. So I am the real Ace Steel.
Trigger warning. What a story.
I am the real Ace Steel of this wrestling podcast.
You are the Ace Steel. So who am I? Jeez.
You're the one. You're the calm person. You're Larry the dog. You're just observing things and everyone likes you, Matt.
Sure, if you say so, buddy. I'll take it.
Ace says that he's chased Collier around. Collier's run from him. He says he god dang, which I loved, guarantees Collier that he's not going to bleed first tonight. It's going to be Chad.
He said this all through his gritted teeth too.
Yeah. I uploaded this a while ago onto Twitter. It is a very crazy Ace delivery that he's known for, but it was kind of surreal after having to watch this not too long after the big Ace Steel controversy in AEW. Ace then says, if you've ever heard of not waking sleeping giants, Ace says it's worse to wake up this crazy little troll. I'm going to make you bleed and bleed hard. He just screams it.
Man, now you got to read the whole promo in that voice.
Never. But I mean, I'm not doing it justice, obviously. But yeah, this is your classic crazy Ace Steel pro. And it was funny putting that online because some people were like, "Yep, that's like classic Ace Steel style," and some people were like, "Boy, this guy, he's got problems." But it's like this was a pretty extreme on the upper end of Ace Steel craziness. But this was. He's cutting a lot of. This was his gimmick, was that he was crazy Ace Steel.
Yeah, well, we saw another one that he cut like in that with like from home with that weird night vision back in the fall, and I just wrote at the end of this. Yep, this was definitely an Ace Steel promo.
Exactly. And that brings us to the embassy of Alex Shelley and Jimmy Rave with Prince Nana in their corner, defeating Claudio Castagnoli and Jimmy Yang in 16 minutes 4 seconds. When Rave pinned Castagnoli after a back-and-forth series of near falls. Matt, I'm actually going to give this one to you, too, first, because I'm just kind of working out the order here. But long match, and a lot of guys I like in this match. What do you think? I'm interested to see what you think of this one.
Yeah, I thought this is like one of those matches where, and I don't usually say this. I mean, it does happen, but I feel like this could have been better if it was 5 minutes shorter. I've been really loving Shelley and Rave as a team, and how much they have fun healing it up. And, one of the things that they are doing, in pretty much all of their tag team matches is stalling and kind of just we've described it before as almost like house show kind of stuff. And,
Hmm.
I feel like that's fun, but down the stretch, I feel like it maybe overstayed its welcome a little bit. I've actually, weird to say, um, I've kind of had my fill of this version of Claudio too. Like I know we've talked about Yang, how maybe hasn't been lived up to some of the hype in ROH, but I've always liked Claudio, and obviously I still think Claudio is an amazing wrestler, one of athletically one of the most impressive of this generation. But I think this version of Claudio that he was doing, where he was sort of like having fun with and doing the A's and doing a lot of the finesse stuff, I was almost like after this, I'm like, I'm glad he's going to turn heel soon because I feel like this has sort of run out of steam. But as far as the match itself, like like Yang and Shelley, they have some fun early. They slap each other in the back of the head after they do like standing switches on each other. But it's a slow stalling start. And at one point, Rave complains that Yang pulled his hair, even though he didn't get anywhere near it. And on the floor, Nana adds to Rave's complaint, but he just shouts rules and regulation, which is just a very fun. I just love everything Nana says. I really do. I've always have. They have some stuff that I'm not crazy about. It's just old school wrestling stuff. Like they do this wacky gay panic spot where Shelley falls behind Rave's butt and then falls headfirst into his crotch. And I'm thinking, like, when is the day where we just stop seeing this stuff so much in wrestling? And obviously, I think at this point we don't really see it much, like in 2022, but it's probably years after 2006, right? Where they stopped doing like heel gay panic stuff.
I mean, and unfortunately, that kind of became around this time, starting maybe when the Mick Foley encouraged that crowd to chant Jimmy likes balls. Like that homophobia kind of became part of the act of Jimmy Rave in the sense of the crowd just like doing that. Like I think there's a moment in this match where someone, I think Claudio smacks Jimmy on the ass and the crowd chants Jimmy likes it, that stuff just became very par for the course for Rave at this point.
Yeah, so they do a lot of that stalling and like heel stooging until about 10 minutes in, the Embassy start getting the heat on Yang. They, Yang, he comes back with a spin kick, but then he charges Shelley in the corner and Shelley moves and Yang sails into the post and then onto the floor. So it's like, first of all, that was a really good bump. But so now they get to start working on Yang for a while. Daisy Hayes gets into some slaps. And after a few minutes, Yang hits Rave with a spin kick while Rave's coming off the top rope and makes the tag to Claudio, or almost makes the tag to Claudio, I should say. But Rave is able to tag Shelley, who knocks Claudio to the floor. And then Yang hits a missile drop kick and makes the hot tag to Claudio. And, then it kind of breaks down a little bit. Shelley escapes an Oppenmari water slide, hits super kicks on Claudio and Yang. And then in what, in my opinion, is the best spot of the match, Yang drop kicks both Embassy members to the outside and then leaps off of Claudio into a dive onto them. I thought that came off really well. And I thought that was sort of like the peak of the match. Then they do this wacky series of roll-ups with Claudio and Rave gets the sudden pinning combo and pins Claudio, which is interesting because there's another more important match later that kind of ends with a sudden pin like that. But, I guess they're far enough apart in the order that it doesn't really step on anyone's toes. I don't know. I thought the match never got better than pretty good. Even though I love the team, I think just the baby faces weren't doing it for me. I'm looking forward to seeing the heel version of Claudio soon.
It's funny, like this is a match where you ended by saying, I think it was pretty good, but you were kind of disappointed, where I probably feel like similar in quality. I think like this is like a low good match, but like, like a 3-star, 3.25-star match. But yet
I'd probably go a little bit lower than that, honestly. But,
yeah, I could even go a slightly lower too, but like yet I came with low expectations just because I haven't been hot on Yang, and this is just a random low card tag, and I actually left kind of pleasantly surprised by this, and I just still, really love the Alex Shelley, Jimmy Rave, old school kind of comical heel shtick. They are having a blast, and I'm having a blast watching it. I am not tired of it yet. I agree with the Claudio thing. It's, he's still really good as a wrestler, but the Hay stuff, it's very one note, and it really does feel like, the crowd still likes it, but for people, who are watching every single Ring of Honor home release in a row, we've seen it enough at this point. Claudio, Yang takes a back seat in this match, actually. Claudio really is the focus and the star of the match. And Claudio it's fun to watch Claudio having fun with the heels here. Like, the spec in their ass was funny. Making them hit each other. He does the embassy pyramid hand gesture while he's putting Shelley in holds. And again, most of the fun stuff here was just like little notes. I had like little comedy bits, like before the match when Shelley and Rave are walking to the ring. Shelley like looks into the crowd and just over the camera mic, you can hear Shelley like warn Jimmy. He goes, "Jimmy, I see a lot of toilet paper." And I love the little like acting like that. Claudio at one point he's chopping Jimmy and Shelley back and forth, and then he almost chops the ref but catches himself. So little fun stuff like that. There's a moment where Shelley kicks Yang, but first he makes like this big gesture and he just shouts karate. I love that everything's just karate to him. Rave wins completely cleanly too, which was kind of a surprise. One other thing I want to mention, Matt, you mentioned like the hot tag. I found the hot tag to be like the weird moment of this match because, Jimmy Yang is the face in peril. He fights off Shelley in that sequence you mentioned. He hits the big flying drop kick, but that's not the immediate hot tag. You think, okay, that's the big move. That's going to be the hot tag now. Instead, Shelley immediately, and I mean immediately, like jumps up from taking this top rope flying drop kick. He tags Rave. Yang is lying motionless just feet away from his corner. Rave then pauses to check on Shelley. Yang keeps laying motionless. Rave comes over. Then they do a spot where Yang gets up and does a very basic enziguri, and then he makes the hot tag. And the whole sequence just felt like if they had just done the hot tag after the missile drop kick, it would have been way more dramatic and hot. Like, I don't know if something went wrong or there was miscommunication, but it seems weird that, like, they actually let the heel make the tag, they let the heel get to him, and then they just do a much smaller move and then the hot tag. But whatever, that was the match. After the match, Shelley asked Yang where his karate man is now. Yang keeps saying Leroy's coming over and over. At this point, Chris Hero snatches a mic. He starts to talk. He's in the crowd, drowned out by "fuck you" Hero chants. Hero says he and Claudio were a tag team and best friends, but after Claudio's rejected Hero twice, something, I can't make it out because the crowd is chanting "shut the fuck up" and the sound system isn't great. Hero throws a chair from the crowd, but instead of it getting into the ring, it hits the ropes and bounces back out of the ring. This should have been a sign for Hero not to do it again, but he would continue. Hero calls Claudio an asshole and says they're coming for him. At this point, Ring of Honor students race to tackle Hero, but not before Hero throws another chair from the crowd. And from the reaction, I wrote my notes, Matt, from the reaction of the crowd, of some in the crowd, it seems like it might have hit somebody. The students drag Hero away as Claudio leads a Ring of Honor chant in the ring. Turns out, Matt, that did in fact hit someone in the ring. I will go from a PW Torch live report from someone, Jason, J-S-I-N. They wrote, Hero then started throwing chairs into the ring from the crowd. One of them hit ringside photographer and all-around sweetheart Mary-Kate Grasso in the arm. Her arm looked pretty hurt, and you could tell she was fighting back tears. She never came back out for the rest of the show. She was pissed, and rightfully so. Fuck you, Hero. Think first next time, says this live report. That's not me.
I vaguely remember hearing about that now that you mention it, the Mary Kate situation. It's funny because, like, I mean, it's not funny, it's horrible, but, like, the part that I was going to say is funny, weird, is just, like, the first throw where he threw the chair into the ring from the crowd, I was like, that's a really impressive throw, but kind of risky. And now, obviously, the second one, like, that risk didn't pay off.
Not only that, Matt, tomorrow night, just to give a hint of what comes for the next show we cover, the very next night of this triple shot, it happens again to a fan this time.
Ridiculous.
So they did not heed their lesson here. But next up, speaking of chairs and things that aren't good, we have our first blood match where Ace Steel defeated Chad Collier in 11 minutes 52 seconds when he made Collier bleed from, I guess technically it's in storyline, it's a chair shot, but when you watch the match, it's clearly he tombstones Collier onto like one of a ring sign, and then Collier clearly bleeds and then gets up and Ace hits him with the chair, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I will say this was one of the least enjoyable things we've seen on Through the Years, in my opinion, in a long time. after having, they built this up for a fair bit for a low, by Ring of Honor standards, for a low mid-card feud. This was a disappointing end. This is a very unimaginative, slow, low-impact brawl. It is a ton of head biting, guys getting tossed into things by the head, punches to the head. Collier asking the ref every few seconds to see if Steele is bleeding, which is basically replicating the worst parts of last man standing matches, which is just check them, ref, check them over and over again when you know it's not the end of the match, slowing things to a crawl. All this makes sense in a kayfabe sense, right, Matt? Like, in a first blood match, you go for the head. But none of it's very interesting, none of it's very imaginative, none of it's very intense. Certainly not nearly as intense as the promos these guys, two very intense promo guys, all the work they had done building this up. We get a spot where Ace grabs a table. He never does anything with it. It never comes into play. Anton Chekhov is crying somewhere. We get a passable final minute where Ace finally gets the chair. He tries to hit Collier with it, which, brings the story full circle where, that's what Collier busted, how he busted Ace Steel up really badly, which started this feud. We then get the finish I described earlier. There isn't even much blood. Again, I would just sum up with, there wasn't this, this match could have worked two ways. It could have been really simple like it was, but very intense, or it could have not been super intense like it wasn't, but be very imaginative and action-packed and have lots of, innovative weapon stuff and big spots, and it was neither. It was just kind of very simplistic, but kind of blasé. The rare time in through the years history I will give a match, certainly in recent years, I will give a match the below average rating. I think the way I could sum this match up most is the two most memorable parts of the match were the following. The first was some fans shouting, "Fred Savage, that's Fred Savage, get out of here, Fred Savage," at Chad Collier. And then he tried to start a Kevin Arnold chant that did not take. And the other most memorable thing was after the match when Ace Steel then basically apes the ending to Karate Kid 2, where he acts like he's going to murder Chad Collier and then honks his nose. So,
what do you mean basically apes it? That's what he was doing.
Okay, yes, he did the Karate Kid 2 ending. And to me, those were the two highlights of this match.
I was looking at previews of this, and I know nobody liked this match, but I liked it. Sorry.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
this is the last episode of Through the Years. This is it.
Well, I will go out on a high note. I enjoyed it. I don't know what to say. Right from the beginning, where Ace Steel is furious and enraged, but he comes out bopping around to the Blues Brothers song. That's right off the bat. It hooked me. And he chucks a Section B sign into the ring and chases Chad Collier around with it. How is that not fun? And then Collier gets a chair to fend off the Section B sign. Come on. Then another fun thing that happened was very early on, Chad was just headbutting Ace, and he yells to the ref, "He's bleeding!" And the ref responds, "No blood." And Collier just yells, "What?" I'm still laughing thinking about that. That was a lot of fun.
Chad Collier was so good.
Yeah.
Chad Collier did not get his day in the sun that he deserved.
Yes. In fact, the most annoying part to me about this match was something that the fans did, which is they Ace sets up a table, and then the motherfuckers chant, "We want tables." I hate when they do that. First of all, I hate that chant to begin with. And then it's he's setting up a table. What's wrong with you? It's right there. Now, I know, as we've discussed, or you discussed, they did not use the table, but they do some stuff with it. The table ends up really not set up, it's just lying flat on the floor, and Collier bulldogs Ace onto the flat table. You don't see that very often, and I thought that was cool. And then Collier starts using the guardrail propped up against the ring apron. Again, another thing you don't really see too often. It's also kayfabe-wise, a good a good way to stop the match because those guardrails cause bleeding. It's actually, in terms of planning, probably not smart because those guardrails cause hard way bleeding. So it could have prematurely ended the match. Although, as I have said many times, which I don't know if anyone realizes this, the guardrails they had at the beginning, which cut people open very often, they changed those. The ones that they have at this point are not the ones that are cutting people constantly. You probably might have noticed that has not happened in a while.
Yeah.
It's not the same. They're not as sharp. But regardless, I liked that they were doing that. I thought it was kind of ridiculous that they kept, he kept hitting each other. They kept hitting each other in the head, and nobody ever bled for a while. At one point, Collier Pillmanizes which is a term that I have not heard too much, but you know what it means when they where you put the body part in between like the folding chair, and he tries to come off the top rope, but Ace press slams him off, and then he fires up and he's about to hit Collier over the head with the chair, but he hesitates when Collier begs off, which is a little bit silly. But then he teases something with the guardrail. Collier goes for a pile driver. Ace backdrops out of it and tombstones Collier onto the guardrail, which you have to admit the crowd popped pretty big for that tombstone on the guardrail. And then, he gets the chair one more time, wraps the chair against his head, and the ref calls for the bell. And, like you said, Collier isn't bleeding all that much, but, I guess he did say he never bled before, so maybe he's just not really practiced and skilled at blading. I thought that the ending could have been a little bit more dramatic, but I thought the match did have good intensity. I believe you that you didn't like it. I believe everyone else that I'm wrong, but I thought this was fun. I thought at the very least, Ace had good intensity.
Maybe you finally have found your Colt Cabana, Nigel McGuinness European rounds match.
I will not go that far, but
I know. Yeah, I like that match a lot more than you like this match. But yeah, one other thing that's weird, I wanted to ask you about this. Like, I have a pretty iron stomach. I don't get personally. Sometimes I'll get offended on behalf.
I thought you were going to say face. Like, I have a pretty face, which I would agree with.
No,
you never.
I have a pretty iron face, Matt. But I will say there's something that always makes me a slightly bit uncomfortable. Like, I feel like, oh, this is wrestling is bad for society. Even when it's appropriate in a match like this, whenever a crowd in unison is chanting bleed, like just bleed, 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 like I feel kind of uncomfortable. Like, oh God, is this the gladiator?
These crowds are a bunch of animals. I can agree with that.
It always reminds you of that GIF everyone uses up one of the early UFC shows where that guy has the UFC drawn on his face and then like "Just Bleed" written on his chest. It's just like, oh God, like maybe all combat sports and fake combat sports should be eliminated because this is dumb. But next, Dave Prazak is outside, joined by Homicide and Julius Smokes. Prazak says Homicide's match with Colt tonight has been canceled due to Homicide giving him a concussion last night. Homicide in turn calls Colt a punk-ass pussy. He says he personally is Colt Cabana's greatest fear, and the chapter is now closed. Homicide then says Colt is old news, and he wants to go party with Smokes tonight. Smokes says, and I quote, "Pop go the weasel, Colt Cabana's dead," which for some reason made me laugh.
Another promo completely in darkness. It's also like, we know concussions are bad. It's just still weird to me, like that Prazak yells at Homicide for giving Cabana a concussion when we know that Homicide has tried to literally murder him in public multiple times prior to this in all sorts of horrible ways. And like really hitting someone in the head with like a hard object in wrestling is much more par for the course and boilerplate than trying to murder somebody with chemicals.
Yeah, I mean, between like tried to cut Colt's tongue out of his mouth, tried to suffocate him, tried to pour Drano down his throat.
Kill him with a coat hanger a few times.
Or even if you want to go back to the first year of Ring of Honor, like tried to stab Steve Corino's eye out with a fork. Like this is pretty low on the list of bad things he's done in Ring of Honor. But we then get a little video recapping the recent Matt Sydal and AJ Styles versus Generation Next storyline, and that brings us to AJ Styles and Matt Sydal defeating Generation Next of Austin Aries and Jack Evans in 17 minutes, 47 seconds when Sydal pinned Evans after a shooting star press. You got four pretty top-level wrestlers there, and unfortunately, Matt, I don't know what you feel about this match, but no matter what you feel about it, it was not going to be remembered after the match that came after it. But what do you think about rewatching this one?
Well, good thing they had the match before it, I guess. Yeah, I mean, this was definitely like Dragon Gate inspired, right? Like, you know, I mean, it's hard to beat the real thing, but the closing stretch was very Dragon Gate inspired. Before that, it was a little bit slow, but like it did have an issue, which is good. It's sort of like a continuation of the match at the 4th anniversary show, and I think in some ways this match was a little bit more exciting than that one. That match had a little bit more depth to it, I would say, but Evans, does a really good breakdance to start the match. It was an on-point breakdance is how I would describe it. Yeah, because he obviously always starts with those, but this was a good one.
And before you keep going, I just want to bring up a note here because of that. From Jason's PW Torch Live report, I didn't notice this. I wonder if you noticed this or if the cameras just didn't catch it, but he wrote, Jack was doing his usual breakdancing and whatnot, and AJ Styles broke character and could not stop smiling. He looked like he was having a great time during the match. I did not notice that, but I love the idea of like AJ Styles breaking because of Jack Evans.
I would have liked to see AJ like clapping along to the beat of the music while he was breakdancing. that would have been even better. But yeah, Evans actually starts with like mat work with Sydal, which you don't see too often, and it was pretty good, but not necessarily what people are paying to see with those two guys. But they end up doing more like fast-paced rope running reversal stuff. And then AJ comes in and he just chucks Evans into the corner and asks for Aries, and Aries obliges. But AJ and Sydal, AJ and Aries does very little before Sydal has to tag in to take on Aries because, there is still that issue between Sydal and Aries. And, they do more fun with like head scissors stuff like their match at Arena Warfare, which they worked that head scissors spot for a long time. They didn't do it for quite as long here, but, it's a nice little callback. I enjoyed that. Then Aries asked for Styles to come in. Now, one thing I didn't love was they act like Sydal and Evans are weak links or secondary members of their team. It's like, okay, we want the big stars to come in and wrestle each other. I don't feel like that's totally necessary in ROH at this point. I mean, I get it. Obviously, like, it's true. Like, Aries and Styles are the big stars. They're the main eventers of their teams, whereas Sydal and Evans are still undercard guys. So I do get it, but I didn't love it regardless. That said, I think Aries and Styles stuff here was more enjoyable than the stuff they did in their singles match back at This Means War. I think, they do a cool sequence of avoiding each other's moves. The crowd likes that. So I enjoyed that. So they didn't work together too much. But, they kind of built to the moments where they did. At one point, Sydal and Styles get the heat on Evans. Sydal, he hits like this sudden German suplex, and Evans lands in this really sick angle on his head and neck, which is kind of a pattern with Jack Evans, right? Of just like taking way too over the top bumps that look very dangerous, but somehow getting up from them. So that allows Styles to be tagged in, and he does something similar to what we saw in the other tag match where he knocks his Aries off the apron and then does this like press slam into a spine buster on Evans, and the crowd just goes insane for that one. And so AJ just goes really hard at Evans because Evans can take it. He's targeting Evans' back. Sydal and AJ, they do a backbreaker leg drop combo on Evans. Jack does a handspring elbow on Sydal and flips all the way over the top rope and goes to springboard back into the ring with a knee, but Sydal leaps and cuts him off. And then AJ puts this like deep Muda lock onto Evans, and Aries breaks that one up. They go for this like double vertical suplex into a neck breaker on Jack Evans and hits it like that's a really good spot. They really beat the crap out of Evans, and I enjoyed that a lot. And then at one point, Evans he leaps over a double backbreaker attempt and hot tags Aries, and Aries does a really good hot tag. He's on fire, and this is when the match really picks up. Big splash onto Sydal for 2. Evans ducks a roaring clothesline by AJ and hits a handstand kick. He goes for a Rana, but Sydal leaps up and kicks him. And then AJ has him in a Styles class position, but Aries hits the crucifix bomb out of that. And then Aries goes for the heat-seeking missile. Sydal cuts him off with the here it is driver. Evans breaks that up, and Sydal's nose is busted open, so I guess he probably broke it there. Then Evans goes for the Sasuke special into a Rana on the floor, which he's done before, but AJ catches him, turns it into a Styles clash on the floor, which won't be for long, but as of this moment, it is the best spot of the entire night so far. And then Aries hits a sudden heat-seeking missile on Styles. But Sydal hits a shooting star press on Evans, gets the win. So they finally gave Sydal a big win here. But I love the closing stretch. I think that the first part of the match was good. Good enough that I would say this was a really good match. But yeah, it's hard to do an imitation of the real thing when the real thing is coming right after. But just on its own, I thought this was a really, really good match.
Yeah, I am in agreement with you again on this one. I thought this was a very good match, like a strong 3.5, maybe 3 3/4. But I like you. Yeah, it's going to pale in comparison to what comes next. I felt like these four guys together are incapable of a bad match, but this did feel like this was one gear lower than maybe they're fully capable of. It only felt like in the final couple minutes that they really turned it on to the fullest extent. But still, I enjoyed this match the whole way through. Quite a bit of fun. I agree that I did kind of feel bad more for Jack Evans than Seidel, where it felt like the story of the match was both Seidel and Styles had no interest in wrestling Jack Evans. Like, they didn't even take him seriously. They just were like, yeah, I want Aries in the ring. Like, early on where, AJ comes in against Evans and he just like pushes Evans aside. She's like, no, you tagging, Aries. I felt bad for our sweet boy Jack. I thought Aries and Seidel did a lot of good stuff together. Seidel doing Aries' headstand drop kick, Aries teasing the same, but then faking him out and chopping to the chest instead. Aries countering a bunch of Seidel's knees into a fisherman's neck breaker that he holds the leg on for near fall. Like, stuff like that. Really neat. AJ Styles is decent, but takes somewhat of a backseat as usual in kind of his, this run for him in Ring of Honor, but I do like anytime he showed this on the previous show. I like anytime he's the big power bully. Like, I liked him tossing Evans, like you mentioned, into his corner and says he tagged Aries. One of my favorite moments of the match, you mentioned how the crowd popped big for, is when Evans just starts throwing strikes to like stand up for himself against AJ, and then that surprising pop you mentioned that AJ gets when he just quickly destroys Evans with a press slam. Like, you think of all the crazy spots people are going to see on the show, and just like a simple thing like that gets a big pop. Highlight of the show, the match for me, this is actually, I think, one of the coolest spots in the whole show, including what comes next, which is when AJ has Evans on his shoulders in that powerbomb position, and Seidel, who is just standing on the canvas in the ring, is able to vertical leap so high he can hit Jack Evans with an enziguri to the head while he's sitting on AJ's shoulders. That was just an incredible feat of just like agility. Yeah, so to me, a match on the border of this is very good. I thought that whole ending sequence was really done well. It was very inventive. Like, every move kind of led into the next, but it all happened quickly. It all made sense. Now, Matt, this is where things get crazy. I like Wade Keller, but we also like, at least I have grown to love teasing Wade Keller. It's one of my new favorite trends of the last year through the years, following his reviews and stuff. This one, Matt, I got a couple of little Wade-isms here. Matt, Wade Keller gave this match and the Dragon Gate 6-man the same star rating. He gave both of them 4.5 stars, and he wrote about this match, the Styles and Seidel versus Evans and Shelley match, which, by the way, it was not Evans and Shelley. But anyway, he says, it may have been my favorite 4-person tag match since Edge and Rey Mysterio versus Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit at WWE No Mercy 2002, which I gave 5 stars. It wasn't that good.
Was an incredible match, in case anyone hasn't seen that in a while.
Yeah, Wade writes, it wasn't that good, but it was excellent. So to Wade, this was on the level of the Dragon Gate 6-man, which, you know what, everyone's allowed their own opinion. I will just say, I think Wade Keller might be the only person in history I've ever seen say he thought this match was on the same level as that match. But, to each their own. But I thought that was kind of interesting.
That is pretty surprising. But, like I always said this about Wade's reviews. You've heard me say it before if you listen to the show. Sometimes he's right. Sometimes he's wrong. But his analysis is always unusual. Like, always. Like, it's always completely singular. Like, there's nobody who analyzes matches in the way that Wade Keller does. Matt, even when I agree with him, that is true.
Matt, I cannot wait. I have a great Wade line for the main event. Knowing I have this, it's like having a nice warm pie waiting on the windowsill that we're going to have for dessert tonight. It's so good. But
delicious, like an Oreo cookie.
Oh, God damn it, Matt. You're going to make me hungry. So after the match, you can hear Seidel ask if he can get a towel or something. So yeah, Matt mentioned it, but I guess we should stress Seidel's nose basically explodes at some point in this match. AJ and Aries both check on him. AJ even holds the towel for a second for Seidel on his nose, which I just wrote, aw. And then you can hear, if you listen in, you can hear Aries actually ask off mic to Matt Seidel. He goes, how bad? Broken? And you can just hear Seidel go, yeah, it's broken. And I don't know who was responsible for Seidel's broken nose, but Aries seems either a little sad or guilty. He goes out of his way after the match to raise Seidel's arm to really be like, hey, cheer for this guy. He just got his face broken. Seidel poses. He gets a bunch of cheers and chants. The Observer would write afterwards that Matt Seidel suffered a broken nose, a black eye, and facial bruises from this match. I would note that isn't a black eye just a facial bruise, but I get what he's saying. But we go backstage to find Christopher Daniels and Allison Danger. Daniels says things seem to be turning around for both of them, looking up for both of them. Allison Danger says tonight you're going to see 6 of the best women's wrestlers America has to offer. She says they're going to give you heart, soul, and maybe even a bit of blood. Spoiler, you're not going to get a bit of blood from them. Daniels, meanwhile, gloats over finally defeating Samoa Joe in a Ring of Honor ring the previous night. Daniels says the question now is when Christopher Daniels is going to shake a hand in Ring of Honor. Is it tonight? Is it tomorrow? Is it the 100th show? Is it the 1000th show? Daniels says it's a very good question. Matt, one thing I want to mention I thought was pretty funny watching his promo is
that it definitely won't be the 1000th show. Probably, I agree with you.
but no, I also thought it was funny. It was one of those things I have to kind of take myself out of my position because I feel like if you watched every Ring of Honor show like us, it makes sense. Oh, it's playing off the very first show. This whole long saga of Christopher Daniels being the one guy who wouldn't shake hands. But I just thought, imagine if you're a fan who has never watched Ring of Honor before and you dropped in, which is very likely for some fans likely because this was a show that was, got a lot of recommendations and stuff. And all of a sudden you see this guy earnestly and seriously being like, the big question right now is, am I going to shake a hand? When am I going to shake a hand? Imagine the seriousness, the gravitas being given to the idea of, the big storyline is he going to shake a hand? If so, when?
If this was the old days where they talked about the code of honor at the beginning of every show, then it might make a little more sense to the uninitiated viewer. But yeah, without context here, it just sounds like a very bizarre storyline. I will say this. One thing that I marked out for in this promo, in case you couldn't guess from listening to me recently, is Allison Danger gets to talk. I was so excited to hear her cut an actual promo.
She's actually portrayed kind of as an equal, like a partnership. Yeah. We're both doing good, we're both wrestling tonight, So yeah, I knew you would like that. She actually has something to say and she's not just treated as window dressing for once. And that brings us to the reason why this show is so remembered. What people just refer to as the Dragon Gate 6-man, but technically it was Do Fixer, Dragon Kid, Genki Furuguchi, and Ryu Saito defeating Blood Generation of Shima, Masato Yoshino, Naruki Doi in 20 minutes, 34 seconds when Dragon Kid pinned Doi after he hit the Dragon Rana. Matt, there's obviously so much to say about this match. I thought the best way to handle this would be, I kind of got some thoughts about kind of the significance of this match. Then we can kind of talk about the match and then maybe talk about the reaction of the match. This is really 3 stages, but I'll start off with, I just have some thoughts. I kind of wrote down some notes and just some thoughts about the significance of this match because, this match, let's just start off with, this match was seen live by far less than 2,000 people, but I would argue it's one of the most influential matches of its generation. And I would argue even more than that. I mean, an even safer argument than that, Matt, is there's probably no single match on Through the Years that we're ever going to cover on this podcast that is more influential than this match. There are trends, Ring of Honor, that were probably as influential as this, but in terms of just one match, that trend happening not over the course of months or years, but one match changing things, this is the most influential match we will cover on this show ever. When Ring of Honor started, I've talked about this a bit before, but the high flyers were different, especially on the indies. You had some AJ Styles, but you also had a lot of Jack Evans, Amazing Reds, SATs, Special Ks, and I love a lot of those guys, especially guys like Jack Evans, and there are actually elements of them I miss in today's wrestling. But one thing about that era was a lot of the great high flyers, they weren't really well-rounded wrestlers. nor did they always even have a good grasp of the fundamentals or good physiques. Sometimes, as we've seen with Jack Evans in the early days, they didn't even have real wrestling gear. They were just these skinny, innovative daredevils who came up with crazy off-the-wall ideas, and they were willing to take huge physical risks to try them, take a lot of physical abuse. Dragon Gate, what this match changed is, again, it's not like this was a brand new style. I just feel it was like it raised the bar. Here were these wrestlers who were just as exciting and just as innovative as the top high flyers of the U.S., the it guys, but they all had better bodies, they had snappier execution, they had more professional gear, they had better fundamentals, they all had some level of personality or gimmick. And I feel like it was after this match, all of a sudden fans in the U.S. saw you didn't have to choose between being a wrestler, being a cool high flyer, and all those other attributes I just mentioned. Like, you could have it all. And I think fans over time, from this point on, they started to expect it all. You know, they wanted not just the cool high flying moves, they wanted all these things. And over time, U.S. wrestling, I feel like, changed to kind of fit that. First in the indies, and then I feel that influence spread to the majors. The It Flyers, they went from being guys that looked like Red or Jack Evans to guys who looked like modern-day Pac or Ricochet or Will Ospreay. In fact, you know, in the cases of guys like Pac or Ricochet, Dragon Gate became the place where those talented guys went kind of like a finishing school where they would get that last layer of polish. Like, watch Ricochet in his early days and then watch him in Dragon Gate. Like, completely different look, physique, you know, level of polish. Even Jack Evans had just started going to Dragon Gate. We've seen him. We've started to notice, you know, working on more of his kicks. And you noticed on this show, you even mentioned, he was actually doing some mat wrestling to start the match, and he actually got some gear now. You know, Dragon Gate was kind of became the place where guys would get that last level of polish. And then, like I said, though, to me, not all of this is good. I feel like wrestling's gotten a little bit too homogenous. There's fewer distinct styles. There's far more wrestlers who do a little bit of everything, and you know, not all of that is Dragon Gate's fault. I think a lot of it's just it's easier to watch wrestling from around the world, and we're more multicultural. But I like different body types. I like different styles. I don't think every wrestler needs to be good at every aspect of everything, and I feel like this match kind of started the beginning of the end of that. But at the same time, I can mourn what we've lost and also celebrate what we have. And then on the Ring of Honor end, I know I'm drawing on, but on the Ring of Honor end, I feel like is this match more than any, like, highlights what Ring of Honor's place in wrestling really was, which was they were the tastemakers. You know, like I see people criticize like, why does Ring of Honor get credit for this match? Like, they did not, you know, invent Dragon Gate. This is another company. It's all Dragon Gate guys, and they were having matches like this before. But what I would say is, you know, what Ring of Honor did for a lot of wrestlers and styles and things and ideas was they brought it to a different audience that was not going to watch it otherwise. So in many ways, they were like what Gabe Sapolsky's mentor, Paul Heyman, his ECW was for a new generation. Because you look at ECW, they always found what was about to break big, be it like a trend, a promotion, a particular wrestler, a style, and then they brought to the U.S. for a relatively small, what I would call a relatively small but influential crowd of the most hardcore fans and journalists who would then kind of spread the word over time to the rest of the wrestling world. So, like, no, Ring of Honor did not create Dragon Gate. You can argue Dragon Gate didn't create Dragon Gate because it was its own evolution of promotions like Michinoku Pro and Gran Hamada and Ultimo Dragon earlier before he formed, you know, Torimon, which became Dragon Gate. Like, the idea of blending Japanese junior heavyweight wrestling with lucha, that lucha risu style, was done before. Dragon Gate was just, again, the refining and next evolution of it. But what Ring of Honor did was it exposed things to Dragon Gate to an audience that would have never seen them otherwise, or at least never seen it live. So just like ECW was about finding like Rey Mysterio Jr. and other guys from Mexico and guys like Chris Jericho and Michinoku Pro at, you know, Barely Legal. They were famous for that six-man that tag match from the Michinoku Pro guys at Barely Legal, their first official pay-per-view. Ring of Honor was about doing that for another generation, and Dragon Gate, in their sense, was their Michinoku Pro, except Dragon Gate had a hell of a lot bigger of an influence from this match and others, I would say, on wrestling in the U.S. and around the world than Michinoku Pro's matches in ECW did. And I got more to add, but Matt, I've already drawn on. So, like, just about the influence of this match. I mean, it's a way we like watching it back in 2022. it just is more apparent than ever just how much it kind of Dragon Gate kind of changed wrestling.
Well, this is the question that I had for you because you would know better than me. So, like, is it this match? Like, obviously, as a fan who wasn't watching Dragon Gate, this was hugely, like, eye-opening for me and a lot of other people. Had you watched these guys wrestle in Dragon Gate before you saw this match?
I had watched a little bit. I had bought the original Torimon Comes to Japan tape, which a lot of people did, which is kind of like the original kind of big Torimon tape. And I would watch an isolated Dragon Gate match here or there. You bring up a very interesting point because actually, one of the things I remember that took place on like the message boards at after this match came out was you had some fans saying, like, obviously we'll get to it after we talk about everything else related to this match, but like so many reviewers or critics saying, this is the best match in wrestling history, blah, blah, blah. And there was a bit of gatekeeping by Dragon Gate fans, which I was by no means, watching. I didn't have the time or resources to watch a lot of it. But I recalled some Dragon Gate fans being like, like these posers, like Dragon Gate puts out matches this good all the time. And so I actually was recently on Alan Forel, our friend of the show, his PW Torch podcast. And before the show, knowing we were going to do this show, I asked him, because Alan, huge Dragon Gate guy, knows as much about he knows more about wrestling in general than he ever know. But I asked him, like, I basically asked him before the show off the air, and he gave me this great answer. I wish we'd recorded and put on this podcast. I basically said to him, like, is this match, like, where does this rank in the Dragon Gate pantheon? Like, are those people right? Like, is this match just another Dragon Gate match, and it's only special because it's in the U.S., or were they putting on matches like this all the time? And Alan remembered those same kind of people that I just mentioned, those kind of people like, Dragon Gate always did this. And he disagrees. Alan, who has seen a ton of Dragon Gate, says he would put this still, I think he said something to the effect of his top 3 to 5 Dragon Gate matches ever. He said that there was a match they did at their big Kobe World Show the year before, which was basically the same guys. I think they swap in Don Fuji for Masato Yoshino, that is on this level or better. But in his opinion, and I would trust, this was one of the better Dragon Gate matches, but it was not, is it absolutely like far and away number one in this elite island on its own? No, but is in that upper tier. So I know that doesn't quite exactly answer your question, but
No, I mean, it's totally worth knowing. Like, but
yeah.
I mean, it certainly got a lot of attention. Like I said, I hadn't watched Dragon Gate, so like this was totally new for me. But there was always a part of me that was like, but am I just like a Western centric ignoramus? And that's why I think this match is so much better when it's actually just like par for the course for what these guys were doing. But I guess if it wasn't, that adds another layer to it. I mean, I think what makes this match special is that it was like opening up another world to a bunch of people that didn't realize this thing could exist. Like there was like a grace and a beauty to it. I guess that even if you don't like wrestling and don't care for the violence aspect of it, it's like this was just such an incredible like I know it's minimizing to call it gymnastics because obviously there's so much more to it, and I know there's story and character involved, but like, I'm not going to pretend that I understood all the nuances of the characters, like that'd be lying. Yeah. Like I was watching this and enjoying the athleticism of it. Like, I know like when you'll get to some of the reviews later, but like Meltzer and Gabe were talking about like, oh, there's this actual deep psychology where they're protecting the Dragon Rana or whatever. It's like, I don't know about you, but like when I watch this match, that's not super apparent to me. What's apparent to me is the timing, the pacing, the athleticism, the grace of the moves, the body control, the intricacies of like all the different spots and everyone working together, and the speed with which they're doing it, and the characters they're projecting. Like, did you experience this like deep psychological story as you watched this match?
No, in fact, I did see it as kind of like a spot fest, like a great, again, I can see nuance afterwards, but I think you just put it perfectly. Like, again, it wasn't that they were just like, oh, they're doing all these things I've never seen before, as much as they're cutting a pace I've never seen before, and they're doing it like just a density to what they're doing, like so much stuff.
Gracefully and beautifully. Like, honestly, like there was just such an art to the way they moved and the way they moved in concert with each other, like some sort of like amazing synchronization. And yeah, like we've talked about this recently, there's a lot of trios matches now where there's some version of this. I don't know if even the best ones now can pull this off, like in all of the depth that and just like everything was done perfectly. Like I don't know, maybe you look closer than me and notice something that was a little bit off. I didn't. Did you? Did you notice anything where you're like, oh, they kind of messed this up? I
literally notice one thing. It's not even a botch. It's just a funny moment, actually, if I can just go to my notes. There's a moment where Todd Sinclair is talking to Doofixer on the apron, the illegal, the people that aren't in for the team, so he can avoid seeing like a Blood Generation double team so they can get away with it. And then Blood Generation, one of the members covers Dragon Kid, like they've done their double team. And you can see Ryo Saito, who's on Doofixer, standing on the apron, and he's actually talking to Sinclair, and he starts pointing like, you have to make the count on, when it's his partner that's getting covered, like, which I thought, again, that's not even a botch, but it's just like a funny thing where he's like,
sportsmanship,
Yeah, dude, you're missing the spot here. Like it's kind of where you're thinking in storyline, I would never want to tell the ref, but in terms of like moves, again, like, yeah, they hit everything, so much stuff, so intricate, so fast paced, and there's no botch here as far as I can tell, and it just goes and goes and goes, and it's just relentless. That's the way I can describe the pace. Like, relentless. And I think I talked on the last show, like, I think the big thing Dragon Gate brought was the idea of, a lot of times in wrestling, the idea was always, you've got to get the most out of every spot. So you do a spot and then you kind of milk the reaction until the reaction's done, and then you get the next spot. And these guys were like, we are going to do so much, you can't keep track of it all. And you can't catch your breath. And the kind of like the sum total of that is the fun. Like, it's not that, oh, you saw a big spot, we got every last drop out of it. It's more like you just saw 8 spots and your just mind is blown because you can't, it's not slowing, it's not letting you appreciate it all. It's just going to keep going and going and going. And
right, and that's the thing that was especially influential. It's like we see many more matches now where that's the case, where they just like overwhelm you with like crazy athletic, hard hitting spots, and you're just like, whoa, and like it just keeps getting like, and nothing really has the time to breathe until the end when you're just like, oh my god, what did we just see? And that is pretty new actually, and but I mean the thing is like it's the execution, I think, that. Besides that really makes it so special, because it's just really hard to do that, and it's just so impressive. And I think that's what really blew people's minds. Like if they were doing this all the time in Japan, that's credit to them, but like it is something to go to what's probably still the biggest market for pro wrestling in the world, the United States, even though Japan is probably pretty close, and just opening so many eyes to it. Obviously, there was a whole world of pro wrestling, especially in 2006, that I think would probably not be open to accepting this, even after they saw it. They'd be like, okay, that's cute, but that's not real wrestling. And I don't think I don't think Vince McMahon, if he were to have watched this match in 2006, would be like, we got to get this on our show, But there was enough people, and I think that's what ROH brought to it. It's like, ROH, yeah, they gave them exposure, but they also cultivated a culture of like wrestling fan that was just like hungry to see this new stuff and appreciate it. And I guess that is like ECW, because ECW did do the Michinoku Pro matches, which wowed people at the time, but didn't change the world the way Dragon Gate probably did. But yeah, I think that's what it is. It's just that ROH gave them a platform where this would be accepted. Like, I'd be very curious if, let's just say, WrestleMania 22, if instead of appearing on Supercard of Honor, they just put this exact match on WrestleMania 22. It still probably would have gotten over, right?
It would have. I will say, rewatching the match, and I'm curious about your opinion on this, I still think this match is fantastic. And I think, in particular, those final 7 or 8 minutes still feel special to me. But I would say, like, the body of the match after that, while very good, like, that does feel like wrestling has caught up to that. And in a way, like, that's, in a way, the biggest compliment you can give this match, because I feel like any match that's really influential or, like, groundbreaking or whatever, like, usually, not just matches, but like movies or anything, a lot of times if you revisit that years and years later, it does lose a little bit in the sense of so many people have copied it and iterated on it. And, and this is a match, where so many people now are trying to do their version of this match. So in a way, I do feel like parts of it, like up until those final 7 or 8 minutes, people probably go, oh yeah, I've seen this kind of match on a lot of shows and it's really good. But those last 7 or 8 minutes, I think, are still out of this world. And I think anything that ages badly on this, which again, not even badly, is just because it's a compliment. It's just because so many people have now tried to do their version of this.
I don't know how much I agree with you on that. Like, I mean, I think to a point I agree that, like, there were just so many combos that you see so many teams emulating since then. But there was still something about these teams in the early, like, even the slow, quote unquote, slow parts early in the match are, like, really fast. Like, you still don't see a guy do what Masato Yoshino does with the running the ropes and all that. I mean, like, that's just like, even at the very beginning, that's different. I don't know if it's possible for people to catch up with that because he was just so incredibly fast running the ropes and doing those moves. And it's just because of the little nuances of the characters and the way they move, even like this basic, quote unquote, most basic stuff in the match is super entertaining. Mm-hmm. Yes, in technically speaking, that stuff is not so groundbreaking anymore. But the way it's executed, I still think elevates these guys to another level that you don't see even now most teams being able to emulate, if that makes sense.
Like in some ways I agree, but I also think like just, we have some great recent examples, right? Because AEW just did that trios tournament. And I think some of the top matches in that trios tournament, like in terms of just wow factor, I don't think they're that far off from this. But I think that's only because, they have years of wrestlers building towards this was the goal, right? Like this
but
match
also like, and again, those also did involve people that were like considered like the best in the world, right? Like that's like Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay and stuff, like it's not like just like, oh, every team that wants to do a trios match, like we'll do this now,
Yeah. And just going to the match itself, I mean, obviously we just talked about how, it is just amazing. I really do focus on those last 7 or 8 minutes because I feel like it is just one big move, one near fall, one innovative double or triple team after another. It just does not let up. And the fans were into the match from the very start, but during the body of it, there's an occasional moments where the match slows down and they would get a little quiet in turn. But then it's like those last 7 or 8 minutes, the crowd goes nuts, where the crowd goes from chanting, "This is awesome," to maybe the first "Please Don't Stop" chant I can recall ever hearing, at least in Ring of Honor.
Which is the forerunner to Fight Forever.
Yeah, and then to generally just losing their minds. And one of the biggest compliments I can give this match, Matt, is a lot of times in modern wrestling, I feel like we'll see in the coming years of Ring of Honor, matches that kind of overshoot the mark where like you can hear the crowd kind of peak and then they do a bunch more near falls. And even though the crowd's still into it, you kind of can tell, oh, like there was a peak that they kind of missed. And there were so many points in this match in those last 7 or 8 minutes, even rewatching where I go, that's the peak. No, that's the peak. And the crowd never burns out. They just get hotter and hotter and they keep finding new peaks. And I felt like there were so many near falls in this match that the crowd would have happily accepted as the finish. But rather than ever reaching a point where the crowd's like, okay, this is too much. We're kind of numb. You did too much. Instead, it's like every time they kind of go past a peak, the crowd gets more into it, like almost like they're thinking, really? Like you're giving us more? Like, oh, thank you so much. Like we can't believe you're going even further. And I feel like there's so many matches that don't have that feeling, right? Where there is a peak, and here it's just like they're almost surprised they're getting so much.
Yeah, I think that is part of the deal, is that they were like, we're going to give you more than you knew was possible. And just keep going. There were still fun parts of that, the early, quote, slower parts of the match. Like, you even get a little bit of Dragon Kid selling his back early on, but doesn't really last for super long. Like, Blood Generation were supposed to be the heels here, right? But, like, good luck getting the crowd to treat either of the teams as heels, But, like, they do some cool stuff, like, when they do get on a submission, the Blood Generation will like block the Do Fixer guys from getting into the ring. There's a lot of spots where like 2 guys hold somebody and like somebody jumps on, just too many spots to list. But yeah, it's the speed and the abundance of the big spots and the pace, the relentlessness of how quickly they come at you. So, like, yeah, I even mentioned this on the last show. I wasn't going to take notes on all the moves. Yeah. But the big spot where Sema does the double stomp on on Saito and then like rolls into the backstabber on Horiguchi in the corner, and then the Schwein on Dragon Kid for 2 is just like such an incredible sequence, which is what leads to that fight forever chant. There's just so much incredible stuff. Yeah, I mean, again, like what makes the match special is not only the moves, but like the pace, and not only the pacing, the execution, but also the charisma and the personality. Like even though I feel like I didn't get deep psychology out of the match, they were projecting themselves like in such a way where you still cared about them, even though you really, a lot of this crowd didn't really know like who they were as characters. I don't want to underplay that. Like these guys really had a lot of charisma and a lot of personality. Like I think that's definitely an important part of the package.
Yeah, you could tell they have charisma, which is hard because, again, this is a match where you don't really have much time to like emote and play a character, but yet they still show off that they have charisma. You can see little glimmers of distinctive styles here and there, like, oh, that guy's more of the hard hitter, and clearly, like a guy like Dragon Kid, he is more of just he's going to take a bit more of a beating, but he's the top flyer here and stuff like that. And yeah, to be able to even get across that you have charisma in a match where for the last half, you really don't have time to do much but just sprint into moves, I think is an achievement. But one thing, and I know we've differed on this in the past, I'm not a huge fan of the commentary. We've talked about this before when Ring of Honor has done this, decides we're not going to do commentary because this match is too good for commentary. This match, I feel like they kind of found closer to a happy medium where they let the guys commentate most of the match, and then the final hottest minutes, they have them duck out where they go, this action speaks for itself, which they always do. Because
it would be kind of impossible to call it anyway. I feel like they could have done it without doing it officially, though. Like they could have laid out just, but still been there. Feel a little less contrived, but yeah, you didn't really miss it because what could they have said anyway?
Yeah, and I don't know if you have anything else to say about the match before we get to the reaction. I mean, I will say to people, this is one of those matches Ring of Honor has uploaded on their official YouTube legally, so this is one of those matches that really, as much as we can describe it, it's really seeing is believing. So I know we have a few younger listeners, people that watch along with us, like, this is one of those matches where even if you, for some reason, just like listening to our show and not watching along with us, like, if you have not seen this match, I do not say this often during the show, like, go watch. You really, this is important even just for wrestling history. You should watch this match, and it's free and legal on YouTube, so there's no excuse to not see this.
Yeah, I have more to say, but I think it's more related to the reaction to the match, okay. So I'll save it for that.
Well, we can get right to that because there is a lot of stuff, because that in some ways becomes the story of this match as well. It's just how the reaction. We'll go to the Observer first. Dave Meltzer would write, Gabe's policy is intended to get as many of his wrestlers as possible booked with Dragon Gate. After seeing the guys in action in their element at WrestleMania weekend, he wants his wrestlers to both learn the style, which he called X Division 5 years from now, as well as personal presentation, because all the Dragon Gate guys have the look of stars and have distinct characters. Sapolsky felt that the March 31st Trios match, the one we just reviewed, they did in Chicago, was among the best matches in company history. He also made this comment about the match, quote, and I think, Matt, this is the comment you've been alluding to for a couple shows now, quote, I think where this match will be unjustly criticized is that people will say it was just a spot fest. Yes, they don't really give the crowd time to breathe or wait for the crowd to be done cheering before going to the next spot. But to say it lacks psychology will be very ignorant. If you look at how the spots are placed and when they are done and how the finishes are protected, you'll see that these guys actually have a very advanced psychology. It is not the traditional American psychology, but it's definitely there. The part that really blew me away was that before the match, Shima told me that this was Dragon Kid's match. If you look at where they put Dragon Kid's big spots and how they saved the one major kick out for him, you'll see that the psychology is really strong. The place was chanting Dragon Kid after the match, and so it is obvious that their plan worked. So, okay, that's the first initial thing, which was, I think, going to you the idea of trying to push back against the idea that they don't have psychology. My opinion is there's multiple levels of psychology. Like, there's psychology of selling and telling a story of the match, and there's also just like match construction psychology, which people I think sometimes overlook, which is stuff like that, which is like end with your biggest spot, or okay, this is a match with 6 people, who's going to get the focus, stuff like that. And yeah, clearly when people say, oh, a spot fest has no thought into it, just because it doesn't have a lot of like long-term selling or stuff, doesn't mean there isn't a ton of thought put into a match like this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, I never was going to argue this match didn't have psychology. I think what I would say is, like, the depth of the psychology and, like, the protecting of the finishers and all that stuff. Like, I don't think that was going to be readily apparent to the uninitiated viewer. Like, you know, when I watched this match, I didn't know what the finishers even were, you know, like, so how was I going to know they were protected? Stuff like that. Like, but it definitely is true that Dragon Kid did become the focus down the stretch. Like, that's, you know, it's very clear that was intentional. So, like, you know, I'm never going to argue this match didn't have psychology. It was more like, that's not what really drew people to the match, especially people that were not familiar with Dragon Gate in the first place.
And I feel like stuff like that too. It's like if it works, a lot of that stuff probably goes under the category of if it's done well, we should notice it, right?
Yeah, like definitely. But like as somebody who's like, you know, we're trying to microanalyze these matches. It's not like there's so much nuance to talk about. Like that's readily apparent, you know?
Yeah, and I agree with your point there. Like, I think what you put on again about like the pace and the intricacies and all that stuff. Like, I think that's the influential stuff, and I feel like almost people maybe like if I don't know if this is exactly what you're saying, but maybe overhype the psychology standpoint of this match a little bit just because they were getting defensive about like the haters who were just like, oh, this is just moves. Like, there's a happy middle between those two things of like.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't just moves. So that's for sure.
But that at the same time, the psychology isn't necessarily, I think, why this match is what it is.
Right.
Either. Like that's not its crowning achievement. But going to the Pro Wrestling Torch, they would write again. I just put this in here too because Gabe was going around telling everybody the same thing. He said regarding the response of fans to the Dragon Gate wrestlers last weekend. Gabe Sapolsky says the Dragon Gate guys were out of this world. They are 5 years ahead of us. And I also put this here because I just thought that's another point I wanted to make, which is. One thing I think that Ring of Honor also helped Dragon Gate with is I feel like a lot of promotions, even small indie promotions, like one smaller than Ring of Honor, they're very prideful. Like even when they bring in outside things, they always want to make us look like we're better than they're like we're the best. And Ring of Honor in their handling of Dragon Gate this weekend was very selfless. Like they had that best of three, which granted I don't think many fans took seriously as like, oh, this is going to decide who's the best promotion. But like they had a best of three match series that was billed as, you know, Ring of Honor versus Dragon Gate. They let Dragon Gate win that series. And then here, you know, Gabe wasn't saying like, oh, they're pretty good and they're on the level of Ring of Honor. Like Gabe was going to every media cycle and basically saying, these guys are 5 years ahead of us. We want to get as many of our guys going there and learning the style as possible. Like they were putting over Dragon Gate in a way bigger than Ring of Honor. They were putting over Ring of Honor for this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, like, yeah, that was selfless. On the other hand, like, yeah, Dragon Gate's a bigger company, right, in Japan than ROH was here, right? I mean, is that fair to say? So it'd be silly to pretend otherwise, and it'd be silly to act like what they did wasn't something that, you know, nobody in the U.S. could have done at this point. So, like...
You say that, but a lot of promotions have fucked up a lot of opportunities over being like, oh, our guys can't lose to your guys.
Oh, yeah, but listen, it's true that ROH was, you know, whatever you want to say about Gabe and whatever, like, he was more honest about that kind of stuff and was more selfless and, like, did put over international and, like, outside groups and stuff like that. It's just true. Like, there wasn't this WWE mentality of, like, you know, no, our way is the way. It's like, no, like, there's a world out there, and this is part of it, and it's an amazing part of it, and we can learn something from it. I think that's the right way to be, and I think it's not surprising to me that Gabe took that approach either.
You know, something I just thought that probably also works in their favor, being able to be this selfless, is there was, and we'll get to this a little bit later, there was still a barrier for entry for watching Japanese wrestling, especially a company like Dragon Gate, where you probably had to order it. You know, this was before easy online availability and seeing shows as they happen even. Like, you had to buy tapes and DVDs from, like, you know, people that, you know, were not officially licensed to sell it, you know, burning copies. So there's also probably this idea of, we can say Dragon Gate is better because how many fans are we going to lose to Dragon Gate? You know, like, you know, if they had said, like, if they had said, you know, like, PWG is 5 years ahead of us, which one wouldn't have been true at this time, but let's say they did, there might have been more in the back of their head the very real possibility people would go, well, a PWG DVD is just the same price and the same difficulty to acquire as a Ring of Honor DVD, so if they're telling me it's better. But it's like the Dragon Gate stuff, it's like, well, I can see Ring of Honor live. You know, it's easier to get I get the official Ring of Honor DVDs. So there's a little bit less of a fear of like, we're going to send everybody away to Dragon Gate. Like, you know, Dragon Gate at this point in wrestling had a ceiling for U.S. fans, probably.
Oh, for sure.
That brings us to The Observer. And this was when Dave finally got the DVD, and he broke it out, his review, into not the Ring of Honor section, to its own review. And this was like one of the big, most important, Dave, you got to see this kind of reviews he ever gave. Ring of Honor probably sold a lot of DVDs. I cut out a few parts of it, but this is the bulk of it. Dave wrote, "You have to get the DVD of the March 31st Ring of Honor show in Chicago. That's not a recommendation. If you are voting on awards or have even a casual interest in the state-of-the-art modern wrestling, if you don't watch this show, you're behind the curve." I expected a lot from it because every report I got from people who attended that show at Mania 2 nights later said that this show was better than Mania, and Mania was very good this year. I've written before, if you don't like WWE or TNA, you really should try out Ring of Honor because every show has a wide variety of styles and you should find something to your liking. There are weaknesses in that most of the guys that are smaller and almost nobody has the freakish steroid look. Not that nobody uses steroids there, but clearly nobody is a bodybuilder looking at wrestling as a way to be a star.
Weird that he lists that as a weakness.
I was going to say, like, isn't that crazy? Like that's Dave still looking at, like, the old school business mentality that, like, yeah, the weakness of this company is not everyone is, like, jacked up to 290. But, yeah, and continuing, but the reason the show is different is the Dragon Gate Trios match. You had 6 guys with only a small percentage of the audience knew. I'd bet aside from Shima, because he's been a genuine Japanese star for years, and Dragon Kid, because of the costume and because he's been a known super high flyer for a long time, that very few could have even pointed out who was who if they had seen photos of them. Within 15 minutes, to say they had the crowd going nuts was an understatement. This was one of the best matches I've ever seen. And as far as Ring of Honor goes, I can't compare it with Kenta Kobashi versus Samoa Joe because they're completely different, but both were almost perfect in their own ways.
One of the best matches he's ever seen, but only gave it 5 stars. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, we'll get to that, Matt. There is something a classic man-on-man match has that this style of fast-paced, lightweight trios match can't have. But athletically, obviously 270-pound guys can't do what small guys do. But there is no other Ring of Honor match I've seen at this level, and I've seen pretty much all the great matches since the promotion started. It's one that not only would I call 5 stars, but couldn't even fathom giving it any less. Plus, I was told by many live that it was the match of the year, even before seeing it. So if anything, that's psychologically the worst thing to be told ahead of time. They did so much that would normally be considered numbing if you were told ahead of time what they were going to do, but they ended up having the exact opposite reaction with the audience. It's like the great Hidaka and Fujita matches with one fast spot after another and everything hitting perfect, but this match was more spectacular, built better, and had a stronger crowd reaction. About 19 minutes in, when the match was already off the charts and you knew they were about to go to the finish, the crowd started chanting, "Please don't stop." I've seen all these guys wrestle a lot of times, and you could see they were at another level because they were in the U.S., particularly Yoshino, who is as fast in doing his stuff as anyone I've ever seen. Dragon Kid on his own isn't a great worker, but he's a guy who really shines when in with a great worker, and he's never looked better. It was just a masterpiece of a match, and I'd be stunned if there's even anything close to it, at least in North America this year. When the This Is Awesome chants started, I was thinking those chants were great for that Styles versus Daniels versus Joe 3-way last year, but this match was beyond awesome. So yeah, that is about as lengthy and as
effusive a review I've ever seen from Dave Meltzer, ever.
Like him actually outright saying, like, if you don't see this match, you're like behind the times.
One of the best matches I've ever seen, beyond awesome. Like, just like you can read every Dave Meltzer review ever, including matches he gave 7 stars to. There is nothing that is more, praiseful than that review right there.
And this is something we've touched on in the past. Like, we always have to do this nowadays when matches get 5 stars because it's so different nowadays. This was when 5 stars was rare, and Dave did not break the. I mean, yes, I know technically he gave Steamboat Flair 6 stars in the 80s, but
no, he didn't. He says he did, but he didn't.
I mean, a non-televised one.
Okay.
There's a non-televised one he claims is better than the ones that made. I mean, Flair claims that too. Anyway, But again, just to keep a reminder how big this was, there was only 7 matches in the entire world Dave Meltzer gave 5 stars to in the 2000s and the aughts. He gave more in the 90s and the 80s. He gave way more obviously in the 10s and 20s. There was only, in fact, here's a little trivia I looked up. This is the third and final consecutive. Ring of Honor had 5-star matches for 3 consecutive years. This is the third and final. The first one was obviously Joe Punk 2 in 2004. Then the Joe versus Kobashi in 2005. Then this in 2006 is the final one. Dave Meltzer would not give a match anywhere in the world 5 stars again for a little more than 5 years after this match. In that match, do you know what that match is, Matt?
A little more than 5 years. Okay, so that would have been Cena versus Punk?
Yeah, Money in the Bank is the next match he gives 5 stars to. So this is it for half. Think about that. Dave Meltzer gives like multiple matches 5. I mean, every 2 seconds now, match 5 stars. No offense to Dave, but like this was the last 5-star match according to Dave you were going to see for half a decade.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember there was like a match, very legendary match in 2000, CMLL, with Viano Tercera against Atlantis, right? And he would rave about how amazing that match. If you look back, he gave that match 4.5 stars. Like, he's lying when he says that, like, this is, like, just the way he's always done these star ratings. He's lying to himself, maybe. But, like, this was about, like I said, this is the most praise I've ever seen him give a match, and this one got 5 stars. So if this match happened now and he felt the same way, it would get like 6, right? So,
well, here's the thing: if he gave it 5 stars today, it wouldn't have the impact that him giving it 5 stars did back then. Right. Because you would need to give it at least 6. Yeah,
he broke the scale and is not admitting that he did, or does not realize that he did. I don't know which it is.
Like for Dave to give a match 5 stars in the aughts was whatever you think about Dave Meltzer, he was an influencer and tastemaker, obviously of his own. I mean, I like Dave Meltzer, but there's certainly flaws to him. But whatever you feel about him, his reviews meant a ton back then. And for him in this decade to give a match 5 stars was basically him saying, you have to go out of the way to see this because you might not even see a match this good in a given year, or in this case, in a given half decade.
Right. There's this idea that 5 stars is like match of the year candidate, but like 5 stars used to be like best match ever candidate.
Yeah. Like this is going to be one of the best wrestling experiences you have in your life. Where if you believe that now, you're having basically, according to Dave Meltzer, one of the best wrestling experiences of your life, like every 3 weeks now. But But Matt, you said you haven't heard a review that positive. I have one more note, and this is Bruce Mitchell's review, and it might be further. And Bruce Mitchell, did not watch Dragon Gate at all. Was more of an old Crockett, a veteran of the Crockett years and all that stuff, who watched a bit of stuff. This is Bruce Mitchell's review of this match. He didn't even review every Ring of Honor show for the Torch. A lot of times he ducked down on a lot of those reviews. He wrote, the Dragon Gate Do Fixer versus Blood Generation match is, hands down, the greatest pro wrestling match I've ever seen. I've seen most, if not all, of the best matches internationally and domestically of the past 3 decades, and this one beats them all. It's state of the art. As this match gets seen by more people, you're going to hear half-smart internet critics criticize it for being a spot fest. Ignore them. They'll be dazzled by the spots, as you will be, because they're faster, more spectacular, and more precise than anything ever seen in this business. This match, though, is much more than spots. It builds one jaw-dropping sequence at a time, pulling you into the story of the match, the battle between these 2 Dragon Gate gangs, Do Fixer and Blood Generation, until one of these wrestlers makes himself to the biggest crowd in Ring of Honor history. This thing will have you cheering and pumping your fist, and when you're not holding your head in grateful awe. It's exciting as all hell. So, again, like those were the kind of reviews from people that normally would not talk about anything in this scene. Like Dave would talk about Japanese wrestling, but even he would not talk about Dragon Gate to this extent. Bruce would never talk about this stuff, basically saying outright saying this is the greatest match I've ever seen in my life. And that meant a lot, I assume, for DVD sales and all of that stuff. So before we finally move on from this match, I guess my one question to you is, where do you think this ranks in the pantheon of great Ring of Honor matches? And I realize that's hard because I'll say this. I think there's so many great matches, like stylistically, it comes down to like what you prefer. And for me, it also comes down to like personal emotional connection. Like to me, this is in the top tier. It deserves to be there with Joe versus Kobashi, the final 2 Punk Joe matches. I'd put Corino Homicide from Bitter Friends, Stiffer Enemies up there. But to me, I don't put this match. This will probably be it's in that group, but it's probably on the bottom end for me, just because those matches, I love lots of styles. Those matches, other matches are more my style. And particularly with stuff like Joe versus Kobashi and the Joe Punk matches, I have like an emotional connection to those matches I don't have with this match. And, if I was a Dragon Gate fan from day one, maybe I would. So I don't mean to downplay this match at all, but, like I was just thinking about asking you that one because you've watched all this stuff with me, but also because, Dave Meltzer even making a point to say, I've watched all the biggest Ring of Honor matches, and this is him basically saying he was kind of seemingly like debating with himself about Joe versus Kobashi, but saying this is better. Like to me, heart of hearts, I still love those Punk Joe final 2 matches better than this.
Well, first of all, this won Wrestling Observer Match of the Year, right? And it's the second of 3 consecutive ROH matches to win that award, and I don't think there were any after that I can remember. So, like, obviously this was a super influential match, but, like, as you mentioned before, there's some thoughts on, like, how much do you even consider this a Ring of Honor match? Because it was an import, and it was a bunch of guys that were not Ring of Honor wrestlers, and not a single regular Ring of Honor wrestler was in the match. Obviously, ROH presented it. They gave them the platform. They gave them the crowd that was hungry for it. So I'm not going to say it's not a Ring of Honor match. It was on a Ring of Honor show. To watch it, you had to buy a Ring of Honor DVD. When I think about the Ring of Honor matches, it means something to me. Obviously, they're going to be with the people that I followed closely and their whole career trajectory, which is not these guys, for, better or for worse. There were Japanese wrestlers that you did get to sort of follow a path with an ROH, Kenta in particular. So, like, when I see a match with him, usually it's against a more regular ROH guy, first of all, but it feels a little bit more like an ROH match, if that makes sense. So, like, when it came time for me to decide what I thought was the 2006 match of the year, ROH otherwise, as much as I thought this match was amazing and deserved to win, it wouldn't be a match that I picked. There are a few ROH matches in 2006 that just hold a more special place to me and are more the style that I would find, that I would sink my teeth into more, I guess would be a way I'd put it. So, no, this isn't the greatest match in ROH history to me. If you wanted to say it was, I would say you're probably right in your own way. But, like, for me, for what I connect to, for what I like the most, there's a lot of matches ahead of it. If that makes sense.
No, and I love that you brought I forgot the rest of this year. Like, that'll be a great thing to follow on this podcast because I won't make a judgment until I rewatch everything. But again, I don't want to act like I'm slighting this match because it's an amazing, like I said, the most influential match we'll ever cover. Well, amazing match.
If you listened to this podcast just now and decided we were slighting this match, I don't think you were listening.
Yeah, but I will say, like, by the time we're done rewatching 2006, this match might not only not be my I could very easily see this match not being my number 1 match of the Ring of Honor match of the year. It might not be my number 2 Ring of Honor match of the year. Like, not to tip my hand, but there are I know what you're talking about. Like, there are matches coming up that
maybe for me probably not in my top 3.
Wow. See, like that, like, I mean, that's going to be the interesting, again, that's going to be the really interesting to follow, which is like, matches?
Just off the top of my head right now, unless they really don't hold up, I can think of 4 matches in ROH in 2006 that hold a special place for me above this one. 4, just off the top of my head.
And I do think that's a good point where, when people so focus on so many star rings and stuff, and I do think that there's a point to be made about not just wrestling, but everything, which is like, when you get to a certain level of quality, at some point, like, a personal connection starts to matter more and more.
Yeah, any of those matches could be the best match, whatever. But, like, the one that works the best for you is the best one for you.
Like, the comparison I make is there's a lot of albums I love to listen to, but my favorites aren't necessarily, are they the absolute best? No, they're the great albums that, like, meant something to me in my life. Like, oh, I played this one over and over after a breakup, or, oh, like, I got really good news and I listened to this song and it came out at the exact right moment. Like,
or just hits your taste the best,
Exactly.
The idea that, like, you're going to look at a bunch of, like, albums of music and be like, yeah, there's one really objective, best album ever. Obviously, that's ridiculous, right? Like, there's no way to quantify that at all.
Yeah.
It's a combination of so many factors, some objective and some absolutely personal.
And that's one thing I think we should try and normalize more is the idea of people going, why'd this match get, 4 3/4 and why'd this one get 5? Like you're saying this one's better. It's like when you get to that level of quality at the upper end of like anyone's personal range, at some point it's going to matter. Again, it's going to matter like, well, which match personally like kind of like hits your, like you said, your tastes more, or do these certain wrestlers in this one match have more of like a connection to you personally? Like, I've been following this promotion forever and this other promotion not as much. All of that stuff makes a big difference when the matches are all really good. And, that's maybe the one weakness this match is going to have for a lot of people. And I should also mention one last thing. Case Lowe wrote, I don't know where the link, I had to dig. It's on the Voices of Wrestling site somewhere. If you look up Case Lowe, all his articles are there about this match. And he made some great points too, and just stuff reading when I was doing research. So I didn't have anything that I was a direct quote from him, but I just wanted to bring that up too. So I want to give credit where credit is due. And again, thank you, Alan, for the talk he gave me too, which was very enlightening. So immediately after the match, we get a huge standing ovation, maybe the biggest in Ring of Honor history up to this point, a Dragon Gate chant. We get handshakes among the teams. That was awesome chant. Do Fixer pose on the turnbuckles. Genki Horiguchi and Dragon Kid excitedly backflip off, like they seem really pumped, like, they know they just killed this. And we get a rare Ring of Honor instant replay of the finish even, so it's a big deal. And then, Matt, we get an FIP ad for Heatstroke 005, a recently released DVD for the FIP promotion, featuring a ton of wrestlers like CM Punk, Spanky, and James Gibson that have no longer, or were even on the indies at all at this point. I looked it up just to be checking. So this is a show that was, this show happened March 31st, 2006. It probably came out a month or two afterwards. The Heatstroke show DVDs they're promoting, like the hot new release for FIP, those shows happened in early August 2005. So
wow, that's actually quick for them.
Next, we find Nigel McGuinness backstage somewhere that isn't this show, clearly, because he was not on this show. Nigel says they're calling this weekend the biggest in Ring of Honor history, and people are asking, where's Nigel McGuinness? He says he's here in Japan with Pro Wrestling Noah, defending the Ring of Honor Pure Belt all over the world, making it the real World's Championship because he's defending it all over the world. Nigel says he's the greatest champion in Ring of Honor history and recounts all the guys he's beaten, including saying he's the one of only 2 Ring of Honor wrestlers to beat Samoa Joe twice, the other being Austin Aries, and Nigel points out, well, I made Austin Aries tap out too. He says one name keeps getting brought up again and again, though, and it's Bryan Danielson. People keep telling me that Bryan Danielson's better than me. Nigel then says, though, Bryan hasn't beaten the people I've beaten, and he hasn't defended his title all over the world like I have. He says Danielson is the underdog. Nigel's the real world champion. Nigel then talks about internet geeks thinking that there are wrestlers better than him. So, Nigel promo, it was a good promo, and we are building to Danielson and Nigel. It is kind of sad that Nigel's like the one guy who does not get major guy that doesn't. Well, I guess you could say the Briscoes too, but they just came back. Like, it would have been nice to see Nigel on these shows, but you can't turn down a big opportunity to go work for Noah.
Yeah, I love this promo. I love like the mission statement promo. It's like it's a turning point for Nigel during this time period, and when he comes back, he's going to be that that new version of Nigel, much more close to it, and he's about to have that big match with Danielson. Just like maybe like a month after this. So like, yeah, this is a big turning point for Nigel McGuinness, and he goes on to have one of the great runs in ROH history. So I think this is another plus for this show that they have this promo on there.
Absolutely. This is like the opposite of the Cornette promo. Like it accomplishes a lot and it's good and it's not homophobic. The holy trinity, Matt, of wrestling promos. And that brings us to our first match back from intermission, a 6-man mayhem, or I guess I would say in this case, a 6-woman mayhem, the first in Ring of Honor history match. Mischief defeated Allison Danger, Cheerleader Melissa, Daisy Hayes, Lacey, and Rain in 8 minutes, 44 seconds when she pinned Rain after hitting the Desecrator. Matt, this was put obviously in the ultimate death spot of death spots, the first match after the Dragon Gate match. 3 of these women making their Ring of Honor debuts. That would be Mischief, Cheerleader Melissa, and Rain. Rain, normally Lacey's partner on the Indies, as one of my favorite tag team names of all time, the Minnesota Home Wrecking Crew, which is just a great tag team name.
A really great name. But I should mention also, since I didn't, Blood Generation, also a really incredible name. But Minnesota Home Wrecking Crew, yeah, that's on another level. That's great.
Matt, what'd you think about this? I mean, in a way, like, it's a nice spot for the one to get a shot on a show this big, but another way, it's 6 people having to fight for less than 9 minutes right after the biggest match, maybe in Ring of Honor history.
Yeah, I mean, it was tough. I mean, for that, I mean, so yeah, this was after intermission, right? So they did have that little buffer. Yeah. It wasn't like they came out right after that match like they would on like a pay-per-view or something. So at least they had that going for them. But yeah, no, it was tough to get the crowd here. Clearly, like they had just had that really successful 4-way women's match the week earlier in New York, and this match didn't hit the way that one did, but they did work hard. I think Mischief was maybe a standout in terms of like she got to have a lot of focus. She obviously won the match. She hit some impressive stuff, and I think the main story here was that Cheerleader Melissa and Mischief were involved in a feud and were sort of going at each other down the stretch. But besides that, it was just like a lot of people doing moves. They immediately start the match with a bunch of people going for pinning combos and breaking it up, and the crowd just really didn't react that much. Again, they were just kind of in the death spot there. But Mischief, she did some extremely impressive neck bridges, but I have to say that when it comes to neck bridges, she was number 2 on the night for doing a lot of impressive neck bridges. But she tried. Certain people just are really good at neck bridging, and it's hard to top them, which we'll get to later. But they do this complicated spot where everyone gets a hold on everyone except for Lacey, who just comes in and slaps Daisy Hayes in the stomach to break it all up. I really had a hard time writing down to describe this convoluted, like, I don't know, a twister of wrestling holds was, but just trust me in saying that everyone had a hold on everybody. Mischief at one point does a pretty good splash onto a pile outside. Hayes was... I complained about this the week before. Hayes was not really much of a heel. She did a little bit of stuff the week before, but like here, she prompts the crowd to cheer her on as she does a top rope moonsault, and then she high-fives someone in the front row after she does it. So it's just like, I mean, I get it. You're not used to doing it, but like, could have tried. Not a big deal, but it's worth noting. But yeah, by the end, they start doing the big kickouts. Melissa back suplexes Lacey. Rain lariats Melissa. Mischief does a sit-out tree slam to Rain. Then Danger comes in and hits the Shimmering Warlock, which is one of my all-time favorite move names, to Mischief, and everyone is down. Then Mischief hits a code green on Allison Danger. See, Mischief wore green. It was a code red, but she called it a code. Anyway, Lacey hits an implant DDT on Mischief. Hayes breaks that up. Hayes heart punches and Yakuza kicks Lacey. Rain breaks that up. So you can see the pattern here. Rain hits the acid rain electric chair slam bridging thing, which is a pretty cool spot. And Melissa breaks that up. Melissa hits the air raid crash on Rain. Mischief breaks that up. Mischief gets a 2 count off a standing moonsault on Melissa. And then Melissa gets an inverted cloverleaf on Mischief and totally bends her leg in this like ridiculously disgusting way, making Mischief kick her own head. And it takes multiple kicks by Hayes to get Melissa to break that hold. Then Melissa charges Mischief a few times until Mischief hits until Mischief green mists Melissa while the ref is distracted. Then hits her Desecrator, which is like a DDT with her leg over the arm on Rain, and gets the win. So you could tell, like, they were doing a lot of moves there, but like there wasn't a ton of reaction to it, and there wasn't a lot of holding it all together. They tried, and it was above average, definitely, for an ROH women's match, but I wouldn't say it was anything on the level of the match the week before.
Yeah, I agree. The biggest compliment and negative I can give the match are the same thing, which is it felt like a 9-minute, 6-person mayhem match where it's, very sloppy, hectic. It's not boring though. And, it has a lot of the same tropes you'd expect in any multi-person Ring of Honor match of this era. Like There's a very ugly sequence at the beginning where everyone tries to pin somebody else. There's a sequence you mentioned where everyone is putting someone else into a submission at the same time. There's the couple two big dives to the floor from Mischief and Daisy Hayes. You know, it has that vibe a lot of these very short matches with a ton of people have, which is, it feels less like a match and more like an audition where it's a lot of one person steps in the ring, hits a move on somebody else. The person that just took the move rolls out of the ring. Someone else steps in the ring, hits their move on the person that just hit a move, so on. And just, you know, it's just that over and over where, like, there's no connective tissue. It's just an audition. But you know what? I've seen men's men, so I guess in a sense that's progress. And it was exciting, even if it was very sloppy. I agree Mischief was the standout because she got to show some personality. And I like that they carried over, like you mentioned, the Melissa Mischief feud from Shimmer, and the announcers made sure to inform us of that. You know, decent. I'll say this. The crowd was not amazing for this, but they were more into it than I would have guessed.
They got more into it as it went along, which is a good sign.
And then how about this for a backhanded compliment from Dave, which again really shows the times that we were living in back in 2006. Dave on The Observer, when he was praising the entire show, he goes, "This show even has a women's match where none of the women were sleazing it up for a reaction." And it's like, I mean, in a way, like, that is, like, true. Like, it was more of a rare treat. But I also think the phrasing, it kind of makes it sound like,
it's blaming the women for that instead of the promoters.
Yeah, like, the women were told, like, that was but, you know, does show, you know, as much as we complain about where women's wrestling is today, and it still has a ways to go to reach equality, like, this was like a normal comment in 2006. Like, it was refreshing just to see any women's match where it's like, oh, it's not about sexual titillation. Like, this is a refreshing change. Like, the bar's been at least been raised that we expect more from women's wrestling on mainstream companies than that. Like, that's not the ground floor for us now. But
true.
That brings us to Homicide, scored to the ring by Julia Smokes, defeating Mitch Franklin, the future lumberjack, via pinfall in 2 minutes, 35 seconds, the future Grizzly Redwood, after he hit the cop killer. So this was just a short squash for Homicide, although Franklin did get a couple moves in, including, Matt, maybe the top rope crossbody with the smallest vertical leap I've ever seen, as in almost none. He just kind of, but this match, you know, it is just, in storyline, it's because it was supposed to be Colt versus Homicide, but Colt's out hurt. It served just as a backdrop for the crowd to chant for Colt Cabana as the announcers tell us what the match was supposed to be. It's supposed to be a fight without honor, but Colt's hurt and the feud is over, except it isn't. Because after the match, the crowd continues to chant for Colt Cabana, and out he comes, mic in hand. He asks Homicide if he thinks a concussion is going to keep him from ending this in his hometown of Chicago. This needs to come to an end, and they're doing it right now. Colt runs in the ring. He and Homicide start brawling. Colt gets the advantage for a few minutes, only periodically stopping to grab his head, sell his concussion, because, of course, that's what you do when you have a concussion. You grab your head once in a while and go, oh, my head. He backdrops Homicide through a ringside table, gets him in the ring, eventually goes for the Colt 45 when Julia Smokes hops on the apron. Colt unsuccessfully tries to throw Smokes into the ring. Colt can't get Smokes over on the first attempt, but they get it done on the second try. That distraction allows Homicide to recover. He hits Colt with a hard chair shot to the head, so I hope to God Colt didn't have an actual concussion the day before. Followed by a chair throw to the head, followed by wedging a chair between the top two turnbuckles and throwing Colt into it by, you guessed it, the head. Colt is now bleeding. Smokes attacks him as Homicide grabs a ladder that is hilariously covered with toilet paper that had been stashed under the ring from the Jimmy Rave entrance earlier. Homicide's hits Colt with the ladder and DDTs him on it. The crowd chants for Colt, but Homicide just wedges Cabana's head between the ladders, the sides of the ladder. He hits it with a chair multiple times as Prazak is just screaming on commentary for them to stop this. Homicide grabs the mic and talks about Colt being Chicago's finest and says if he sees Colt tomorrow night, he's going to end not just his career, but his fucking life, he says. Refs check on emotionless Cabana. Some fans are really getting into it at ringside with Smokes, actually, like getting kind of aggressive with Smokes. Smokes calls one fan Mr. Potato Head. And then at this point, Colt's out of the ring. The people have gotten him out of the ring. Homicide and Smokes are walking to the back. Chris Hero and Necro Butcher walk back through the crowd, back into the ring. The crowd chants, "Fuck you, Hero," as Hero gets on the mic and says, "What you just saw wasn't ultra-violence. CZW is ultra-violence. Ring of Honor is garbage." Adam Pearce and Necro Butcher run into the ring, and now we have a new brawl. Pearce throws Butcher off the ring apron onto the hard, unpadded floor. They brawl into the crowd, where Necro throws chair after chair at Pearce. Pearce fights back and suplexes Necro on the floor and hits him with a bunch of chairs, none of which we see, as Necro is not lit in the crowd, only Pearce. Like 7 chair shots wasted for nothing. Necro fights back, and they move back to ringside, where Necro throws a chair that looks like it catches Pearce right in the face. It looked horrific to take. In the ring, Pearce bites Necro and then goes to suplex Pearce through a ringside table. When Chris Hero reappears, he hits Adam Pearce with a chair. Necro then side Russian leg sweeps Adam Pearce through the table. Jim Cornette then runs in the ring with his baseball bat. He hits Necro with it. Chris Hero immediately puts Cornette in a Fujiwara armbar until Samoa Joe runs in. He takes out Hero. Joe grabs the bat and poses in the ring with it as Hero and Butcher try and flee to the ring entrance, only to be met by BJ Whitmer. Hero then runs back into the ring where Joe and Pearce are waiting. Pearce lays out Hero with a chair shot. BJ hits Hero with a hard chair shot. BJ Whitmer, Adam Pearce, Samoa Joe celebrating the ring with Cornette as we get a big Ring of Honor chant. Cornette grabs the mic, tells security to dump this garbage in the dumpster out back, says, "Let's hear it for the home team." BJ's foot is still in a full ass cast, I should remind you. We then get a rare Adam Pearce chant, a BJ Whitmer chant, a Cornette chant, the 4-man raise arms. Everyone leaves but Joe, who welcomes Chicago to Ring of Honor. Joe says, to borrow someone else's line, he came here to kick ass and chew bubblegum, and he is officially out of bubblegum. He wants his match to start right now. Now, before we get to that, that's a lot. So that is a classic kind of Ring of Honor ECW. One segment bleeds into another kind of thing. I thought it was exciting and pretty well done. I mean, it's not going to be the most memorable chapter of the feud, but I thought good. That was my opinion.
So for me, I mean, I think I saw them as obviously they bled into another, but I saw them separately, the Homicide and Cabana and the CZW thing. When it came to Homicide and Cabana, I feel like in a vacuum, it was a good brawl, but having watched all these shows, I feel like it was just one of those too many for me. It's just all right, enough already with these guys, not having the real match. And I get it. They're trying to get from day 1 to day 3 so they could have the match, but I feel like I could have just as easily had Cabana come out and cut a promo here for the next night instead of doing another one of these brawls. Oh no, he's hurt him again. Even Homicide saying that he was going to end Cabana's life. All right, at this point, it's okay, blasé, it's boilerplate. He's tried to murder and threatened to murder Cabana 100,000 times, so it's not a shocking thing for him to say. So I just feel like I'm glad that we're finally getting to the match tomorrow. There were things that were good about the angle, things I didn't like. I think overall I thought it was good, and I thought they did a good job of letting it extend out over, 7 months. But this brawl right here felt just this was it for me. This was gratuitous. I'm all right, enough. I'm done with these brawls at this point. Let's just have the final match already. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I feel like going back to the last show, I feel like I just hit this exact same point you did one show earlier, because I feel like I basically just said what you said at the Homicide Cult thing at the start of the last show. So yeah, I think we're both kind of pretty in sync of, it's just, and we've seen this with Ring of Honor feuds before, right? Where it just goes on a little too long. It hits the same note a little too frequently.
Yeah, exactly. It did have some fun stuff, like Julius Smokes saying that Walter Payton should be rolling in his grave right now, because I guess Walter Payton was a big Colt Cabana fan when he was training in the 90s. I don't know, but yeah.
Chicago Bear.
Yeah, I just thought it was so funny where we're supposed to be shocked that Homicide says, "I'm going to end your fucking life." It's yeah, no shit, you tried 7 times right in front of all of us. When diminishing returns, right? When you get a situation like that. As far as the CZW brawl, I pretty much agree with you. It was good, fine. But I think 2 things could have made it better. One, you could see what was happening in the crowd between Necro and Adam Pearce. There was a spot where you saw Pearce just repeatedly chair shotting darkness. It was just because you couldn't see Necro at all in that moment. And I think in a brawl like that, it would have also been more entertaining. I know this was just ROH policy that when it's not an official match, you don't have any commentary, but would have been better with commentary, I think. otherwise, again, it was another thing that was just like keeping it going. It wasn't advancing anything. It was just keeping it going, getting big pops for the ROH guys, and I guess establishing that these were like the three, um, I guess, flag bearers for ROH. They were the people that were going to defend them in what would be eventually the six-man at war at the 100th show.
Yeah, I feel like that was the one development is like, although again, yeah, they've basically done that on the last show, but basically kind of showing you like, this is the team, that's going to represent us coming up. But that brings us to the semi-main event, the three-way match. Samoa Joe defeated Jimmy Jacobs and Christopher Daniels in 9 minutes, 14 seconds when he made Jacobs tap out to the rear naked choke. So, yes, this was originally supposed to be Joe, Daniels, and Whitmer kind of combining the two Daniels feuds. But obviously Whitmer had pulled out the next two nights of the triple shot after he broke his ankle, either via the Jimmy Jacobs match or the nefarious actions of the CZW wrestlers. Before the match starts, we get some waving cell phones from Jacob for Jacob's entrance. Lacey gets on the mic to tell Jimmy that this is a great opportunity for him tonight. When Christopher Daniels makes his entrance, we can hear him actually say to Jacobs, "What are you even doing here, Jimmy?" Which I thought was a nice touch. Like he's still expecting Whitmer to be in the match. I thought as a match, this was enjoyable enough. I thought Jacobs replacing Whitmer here actually adds a fun dynamic to what would probably otherwise just be a nondescript random three-way. Like, he had some comedy early with Daniels and Joe both going to war and having no interest in Jacobs, no selling him and fighting him off until he stomps both their feet and hits them with a double drop kick to get their attention. He does get some offense throughout the match. We get some character work as well. Like, he defends Lacey at one point. Joe and like, Joe's going to go after Lacey on the apron, but instead, Jacob's defender accidentally bonks into her. He ends up spending a bunch of time on the floor, like apologizing to her. The match itself, it's a sprint. It's a 9-minute sprint, which some might be disappointed by its length, but I feel like these guys cut a pretty fast pace because it was 9 minutes. And if you did this longer, maybe they wouldn't have. And it's one of those matches where months ago, I might have been disappointed if Samoa Joe's role on a show this big was a 9-minute match where it was just good but not great. But I feel like we are firmly in the era of Joe in Ring of Honor where he's kind of like takes a back seat to a lot of stuff. And, on a show with other great matches that carry the load, I am fine with like a 9-minute good but not great match. And there were some fun moments. Prazak calling Jacobs creeptacular on commentary, and also mentioning that the Ballad of Lacey music video is included as a bonus on this DVD, which again shows how big Ring of Honor was into like that music video. The idea they're putting it was probably one of their best-selling DVDs ever. Daniels Uranagi, Jimmy Jacobs onto Joe as he reverse DDT'd Joe. That was really cool. Joe does an elbow suicida that hits both Daniels and Jacobs at the same time. Jacob screams top 8 and then goes for 8 punches on the corner on Joe, like his song where, Lacey put me in your top 8 on MySpace, which I realize is a reference our younger listeners will, if there are any, will not get. But, and Jacobs also hits Lacey's finisher, the implant DDT, which I thought was a nice touch. And Jacobs also counters an Angel's Wings into a Rana, which looked really cool. And this match has a rare Samoa Joe super kick, on Christopher Daniels. So, Matt, overall, again, I thought for a 9-minute match, that's plenty of fun stuff for me.
Yeah, I like this match a lot more than I remembered, in the sense that, like, I really didn't remember this match at all. Like, I'd seen it, but I didn't remember it. I agree with you that the character work and, like, the focus on Jimmy Jacobs added a really fun dynamic to what had, kind of run its course between Daniels and Joe. I liked their match the night before, but I didn't need to see it again. And so I think this kind of setup allowed me not to see it again. This was something different. They do like you said, they do stuff where like Jimmy is the pest trying to prove he matters too, so they knock him out of the way a bunch of times. But then, he does get more focus. And there was a cute convoluted spot where Daniels goes for the last rights on Joe, but Jacobs stops him. So Daniels lifts Jacobs up and slams him onto Joe while doing an inverted DDT on Joe. Like, very convoluted, but I thought cute for a match like this. Maybe there was some context in a more serious match where I would have been like, all right, that's stupid, but I enjoyed it here. I also thought that double elbow suicido was like really awesome. Like, I also liked where he set Jacobs and Daniels on opposite sides of the ringside area. So he like that he was going to do ole kicks into both of them. But instead, he just hits one on Daniels, and then Jacobs moves away before he can hit one on him. And you could hear an audible "aw" from the crowd when they don't get their second ole kick. Also, when Jacobs yells "top 8" before going for 8 punches in the corner, like you mentioned, I think that was like he was planning on that being a signature move, like the top 8 where he does. But like, I don't think it ever really took off. Did you have a MySpace back in the day?
I might have. If I did, I forget. But like, it was not popular. If it was,
it was not a focal point of your life. If you had one, you didn't. It wasn't something that you really paid a lot of attention to.
MySpace was like the first site where I was like, oh, I can look up like kids I went to school with. Like, I feel like that's no longer a novelty. It was like the first thing. I feel like that's why most of it's like, oh boy, I can see some old friend of mine in high school, what like bad, like 30-second clip of an MP3 they have playing on loop on their page here.
Yeah, I think I killed MySpace because I got my first one in like 2007, and that was like right when everyone was like, okay, we're all switching over to Facebook now. MySpace, that's it. So I feel like I was the person that ended MySpace. That's what I could take credit for. But anyway, as far as the match, that I thought that the spot where not that I'm into this man on woman violence stuff, but like I did think that it was good character stuff where when Daniels runs Joe into Jacobs, knocking Lacey off the apron, and then Jacobs feels horrible, and that allows Daniels and Joe to kind of do their thing in the ring while Jacobs is tending to Lacey, and then Lacey berates him to get back in the ring, like, all right, I'm fine, leave me alone, go win the match. I thought all that stuff was like good character stuff. I think Jacobs' character is working really well at this point. So I thought that the match was a weird mix of comedy and action, but like I liked it. I thought it was short. I thought it was fun. I thought it was very entertaining, and I think that Jimmy and Lacey were really good.
Agreed. And so next we get an ad for ROHvideos.com, one for the merch section of the Ring of Honor website, and then we get our main event, the Ring of Honor World Title match. Bryan Danielson successfully defends the title when he defeats Roderick Strong via pinfall in 56 minutes, 5 seconds after he reversed the Stronghold into a cradle. So, Matt, I'm going to let you go first on this, but a couple notes first that we should tell people. So, first off, for people that didn't own the DVD, this was a rare, but not totally infrequent, but fairly rare. This was a double DVD set for Ring of Honor. So, this whole show's like well over 4 hours. This show was, if you were just watching this at home on DVD, you had watched about 3 hours of wrestling by the time they got to this. If you were watching this live in the building, the announcers even make a point to tell you this. This match started right around midnight, and it goes almost an hour. So I know after we talk about the match, Bryan Danielson has a quote in his book. I don't know if you have it, Matt, but if not, I can send it to you as the designated Danielson reader. But yeah, it's the other thing. If there's anything else the show's remembered for, it's probably just like the audacity of, on the night of the Dragon Gate match, these guys had to go out there at midnight and work almost an hour. I know there's different opinions on this match. Matt, what do you think about this?
Well, first of all, I don't want to step on like whatever like plan you had for the order, but I'm sort of going to start with what Danielson said about how.
Oh, go! That's great. That's
yeah.
Great.
So I mean, I wasn't going to read the whole quote, but I do have it right here. But so I can do it. But basically, he didn't like the match because of how late it got into the ring. What he says was, and let me pull it out right here. Our first show on Friday had more than 1,000 people, and they seemed to really love it, with the exception of how long the show was. Gabe wanted me and Roderick Strong to tease an hour-long draw, but have me beat him right before the 60-minute time limit. It was a great idea, but the problem was that the show started at 8 p.m., and by the time Roderick and I went into the ring, it was already after midnight. The full show had already been going on for 4 hours. The crowd was tired, and I could see people leaving midway through our match. I couldn't help but think, I wish they would have done that for the Aries match. I'll let all of you go back and find the Testing the Limit episode to find out what that was referencing.
Yeah.
Yet we got through it, and the crowd gave us a polite applause after we wrestled for 55 minutes, ending the show at 1 a.m. All right, so here's my take on this. Bryan Danielson is wrong about this match. This match was fucking fantastic. That's my first thought of it. In my opinion, the second best of all of his title defenses. The only one of so far that we've reviewed so far, not ever. And the only one that I thought was better was his last match against Roderick Strong at Vendetta. Now, as far as the crowd, yeah, I mean, if you watch the Do Fixer versus Blood Generation match, you can tell this crowd had an upper level of volume that they did not reach for this match. But the idea that this crowd was particularly subdued and quiet doesn't come across on DVD to me at all. Go back and watch the Bryan Danielson versus AJ Styles match from Dissension. That crowd was quieter than this. If you watch some like the Bryan Danielson against Steve Corino, that crowd was quieter than this. Bryan Danielson against Austin Aries from Enter the Dragon, that crowd was quieter than this. Even some of the earlier Strong versus Danielson matches, especially that first one, there were moments where the crowd was not so much louder than this. This was not an unusually quiet crowd. They were tired, definitely, but they were into this match like the whole time. I really, really think that. Right from the beginning, there was a loud dueling chant. You know, yes, like, it maybe didn't have the fervor that it would have had if it was earlier in the night, but, like, they did a remarkable job of keeping the audience invested after a 4-hour show where they went an hour and got into the ring at midnight. I don't think this was as good as the Vendetta match because I don't think it had, like, the depth of character, but what I liked was they did something a little different. I feel like in the first two Danielson versus Strong matches, it was all about Danielson and Danielson establishing that new arrogant heelish champion character. And in some ways, he sort of ate up Strong in those matches. Like, not in necessarily a negative way because, you know, those were fantastic matches. And if you go back and listen to our review of Vendetta, you know that match was a big deal for me. Like my number 2 match of 2005, my number 1 match of 2005, where both wrestlers were ROH regulars. And this wasn't, you know, that, but like, I like that this match was a little bit more even. It didn't go quite as deep into the Danielson character building. You know, Danielson's character was already established. He didn't need to do that quite as much. So there was just a little bit more even wrestling, you know. Danielson, you know, they start out with, you know, with the wrestling, and you already see, like, with Strong's chops, like a big red handprint on Danielson's chest. And just like in the other 2 matches, he escapes every time Strong hits one of those chops, you know, and stalls a little bit, you know, to get over the chops. There's this really incredible spot right at the beginning, first 10 minutes, where Danielson does this incredible feat of strength. Now, I mentioned neck bridging before. I feel like this match, I don't know if you noticed this, Trevor, was like peak Danielson neck bridge.
Yeah.
Like, he did a lot of them in this match. Like, and he used to brag at this point about how long he could neck bridge. And, like, he really showed off his neck bridging here. So, like, he neck bridges there's a knuckle lock where Strong gets Danielson down. He's neck bridging. And Strong jumps on his knees, which is a pretty, you know, it's a spot that you see sometimes where a guy's neck bridging in a Greco-Roman knuckle lock. But Danielson, with Strong on top of him, bridges all the way up and sits up and monkey flips Strong. Like, that's unbelievable to be able to do. And, you know, Danielson's not a guy that's known for his, like, brute strength.
You know what sucks? It's like people call down, like, you know, oh, Danielson, like, he doesn't look like, that's one of those amazing feats of strength that, like, you don't get to show off very often. Like, it's not like a muscle where everyone just looks at it and goes, oh, you're big. Like, I'd be wanting to do that all the time. Like, Matt, come over here. Stand on me.
Yeah.
Let me do this.
Exactly. Now, that's not the last time Danielson does a neck bridge either. So, like, there's one point where, you know, and I think some people don't like this kind of stuff. Danielson starts obviously stalling, and he's arguing with the fans and taunting them by saying he'll walk away to the back, and then he actually does so. So Strong gets on the mic and is like, come in, defend that belt you're so proud of, motherfucker. And, like, you know, I think what people don't like is when you do stuff like that, you make it really obvious that you're going long. But, you know, it was like one little piece of character work. It took like a minute, so it didn't really bother me. But, you know, Danielson is still trying to maintain the intensity because he does start slapping the crap out of Strong as soon as he comes back into the ring. And, there's a few spots where like Strong tries to do Danielson's own surfboard, the Romero special, but Danielson fights it off, showing he's one step ahead. And then Strong powers out of Danielson's own surfboard attempt, and then they slow things down a little bit. Danielson finally takes over a little bit. He dismantles Strong with kicks, knee drops, holds. They do a fun little sequence of reversing, like Japanese stranglehold, like straitjacket type stuff. And, Strong is hitting his chops, his stomps. We see that Danielson once again is bleeding from the chest like he did in the previous two matches. But like even you see the first 20 minutes, like there's more just like wrestling. There's less of Danielson just like dominating, being a jerk, running away. There's some of that. It's not like he doesn't do that, but it's not the overarching story of the match. It's much more even. There's one spot where Danielson comes back from Strong doing a chop. He does his backflip, run up the turnbuckle, but Strong immediately follows with a kick, gets a flurry of offense, and finally gets the surfboard on. But he has so much momentum on the surfboard that Danielson like rolls back and both guys have their shoulders down. So Strong has to release it. And at this point, Leonard even notes what I noticed, which was that neither guy has been able to get the advantage for more than a few minutes at a time. Which is true. It's like a lot of back and forth momentum shifts, which again is what makes this match different than the first two. At one point, a fan calls Danielson Bob Backlund. So like Danielson again gets that twinkle in his eye, which he gets when a crowd says something that gives him an idea. And he does like an old school running atomic drop, which is a move that we rarely saw in 2006. And I'd say almost more rarely seen now. Can you think of anyone that regularly does a regular atomic drop nowadays?
No, I can't remember the last time I've seen an atomic drop in a major promotion. Not that I watch everything, but...
Well, now we know that Bryan Danielson can do a perfectly good one, and he follows that by saying, Bob Backlund, huh? So I definitely enjoyed that. Danielson, he works the abdominal stretch, which is something we've seen him do on other recent matches. He does that thing where he grabs the top rope and like wiggles his fingers as he grabs it. And then eventually Sinclair catches him, kicks his arm, and Strong tosses out of it. Classic heel spot. But this time he actually defies expectations by getting Strong right back in the abdominal stretch like a minute later. You don't see that too often when the abdominal stretch gets stymied like that. So like this is like the longest stretch so far, right before the 30-minute mark of Danielson being in control, and he actually gets the cattle mutilation on here, and Strong quickly makes the ropes, and now Strong tries to bridge out of a knuckle lock, so Danielson stands on Strong's neck, which is a very interesting twist on that spot. And then Danielson milks being on the top rope for like 4 seconds before coming off with a diving headbutt, which allows Strongs to move, and he hits a series of cradles for 2, and finally at 30 minutes he hits the cradle backbreaker for 2. So he's finally taken over, and I think that's the first backbreaker of the match. So that follows the pattern of them having a lot of restraint, waiting till like the 30-minute mark before Strong starts hitting backbreakers. That happened in the last match too. So Strong's in control now, hits a big top rope superplex to solidify his advantage. He locks in the Strong hold, and listen, if you're telling me this crowd is dead or tired, they are definitely reacting to this Strong hold. And Danielson makes the ropes and then escapes to the outside. He's clutching his back, but Strong doesn't give him any space. He immediately leaps at him with a forearm off the apron. And then back in the ring, Danielson catches him. He hits a bunch of German suplexes, transitions right into the chicken wing. Strong makes the rope. So this is a pretty hot sequence 30 minutes in. They're making the crowd think that the match is close to finishing, and even Prazak says this has to end soon. And, again, the crowd is buying it, whatever you want to say about them being tired. But they slow it back down. Danielson starts targeting Strong's knee after Strong hits his knee over the middle rope. He does some more neck bridges while tying up Strong's knee. He does an Indian deathlock, does a neck bridge. Does a spinning toe hold, does a neck bridge. He's just showing off every neck bridge variation that he could possibly do here. And only Danielson could just start a slow technical sequence 35 minutes into a match and have it make the match more exciting, but I thought it did get more exciting here. Strong comes back with this like really insane gut wrench backbreaker that looked brutal, but then he sells his knee, which he stupidly dropped Danielson on, even after it had been worked on for a while, which you'd think he could change it up and use the other knee. This is like one of the few flaws that I saw in this match, which was a few moments where I thought Strong acted kind of dumb, like using his bad knee for a backbreaker, which I don't think it, like, you're dropping them on the knee, so I don't think it really matters which one I don't know. But anyway, Danielson, he comes right back with a figure four, and Strong escapes a dragon suplex, rolls up Danielson for 2, and then Danielson goes right back after the knee. Eventually, Danielson locks on his own Boston Crab, which it's not a bad Boston Crab, but it looks awkward because you never see Danielson doing that hold. Like, it's always fun to watch these Danielson matches, and I feel like every long Danielson match, he does another move that you don't see him do in other matches. And I think the Boston Crab is one of them. You really don't see that very often. And what I thought was a really cool spot, I don't know if you remember that this was a callback to the Vendetta match. Danielson goes for a roaring forearm, and Strong does the Fujiwara armbar and then goes right into the cattle mutilation, which gets a really big pop. But also, Danielson did that in reverse at the Vendetta match, where he took the Fujiwara armbar right into the cattle mutilation. But Strong cannot hold it for very long because he does not have the magical bridging power of Bryan Danielson. So I don't know if that was intentional, but it stood out to me. Like, Danielson could bridge all night long. Roderick Strong cannot neck bridge all night long. So they struggle over a suplex over the top rope, and Strong suplexes Danielson to the floor as Gabe, I assume, tells Prazak to go after some quote-unquote wise asses heckling the match by saying those same people will enjoy John Cena's match on Sunday. So this was definitely an era where it was cool to bash Cena, I guess. But here's the thing. This was recorded, like the audio was recorded after that WrestleMania. And I thought most people agreed that Cena versus Triple H was a good match. So felt petty, but I guess that was the cool thing to do there. And you obviously, it's totally, like we mentioned recently, Gabe's voice saying, "I love how Ring of Honor fans police themselves."
Yeah.
That's always the tell right there.
Said.
Yeah, always the tell right there. So they do the spot where Strong tries to chop Danielson against the ring post, and this is Strong being dumb part 2. Anytime you do the "I'm going to chop you against the ring post," you look dumb, because multiple times now we've had the opponent duck and Strong chops the ring post, which happened again here. So now Danielson...
And by the way, it happened in the same place because reading reviews after, I was reminded that the last time I think it happened to him was when he beat Matt Hardy in Chicago.
Yep.
I think you can even hear a fan reference Matt Hardy after he chops the post.
Chicago ring posts are Strong's Achilles heel. So now Danielson goes after Strong's head and wrist, like I said, He also seems to have a busted lip himself at this point, because this was a very brutal match. Like, I haven't mentioned that enough, but all the chops, all the strikes, very hard hitting. But, Danielson gets this crazy wrist arm hold where he bends Strong's wrist back, which had to hurt really bad, even if Strong's wrist and hand wasn't already injured. And he yells at him, "Tap out to a wrestler." Which I
just tap out to a wrist lock.
Oh, I thought he said tap out to a wrestler. Okay.
No, because he's like, "Come on, tap out to a wrist lock." He's "I've hurt your wrist so bad, I'm going to embarrass you by making you tap out."
Well, that makes more sense and is a much better line. So Danielson, he stomps on Strong's wrist even after Strong grabs the rope. So he's being heelish here. He comes with this chop kick combo, which actually reminds me of the way he wrestles in 2022, where he does the chop followed by the kick, followed by the chop, followed by the kick. That's much more of a later Danielson thing, but he's doing it here. He eventually gloats one time too many with a bunch of slaps, and eventually he meets a series of left-handed chops by Strong. So unlike with the knee, Strong at least knows enough not to use the bad hand against Danielson. Then they're fighting on the outside. Strong charges at Danielson against the guardrail, and Danielson moves and sends Strong over the guardrail into the front row. So he goes back into the ring, and you figure he's about to do the big dive into the crowd, but for some reason, and I think this is one of my other big flaws in the match, Strong comes back over the guardrail, and Danielson just gives him a kick, which is supposed to send him, back into the crowd, but it doesn't. Like, it knocks Strong into the guardrail, and then it just looks like Strong is just like voluntarily crawling over into the front row. Like, it was very awkward. Takes the match down a little bit for me. But, of course, that's so Danielson can then finally hit the springboard dive into the front row, which the crowd loves. Danielson's back in, hits the missile drop kick. And then they get into like the last 10 minutes of the match with a bunch of big moves. Strong kicks out of a crucifix. Danielson goes for the knockout elbows, like the finish of the last match. And actually right about the same length of time as the finish of the last match, like almost 50 minutes in. But Strong picks him up into the double knees and then sells his knees big so he can't follow up. Then he hits 2 sick kicks, followed by the Gibson driver. Danielson kicks out for a near fall that I would say a lot of the crowd actually bought. Then Strong hits 2 half Nelson backbreakers and a torture rack backbreaker, continues to sell the knee, and Danielson kicks out after a delayed cover. Strong, he struggles to get Danielson into the stronghold, and Danielson slowly crawls to the rope, and he makes it as Strong crumples. And then finally at the 50-minute mark, Danielson hits the belly-to-back superplex, gets a 2 count, locks on the cattle mutilation, and he keeps rolling Strong back into the center and locking the hold back on. But eventually Strong does make the bottom rope after a long struggle. But Danielson's tenacious. He goes for the hold one more time, but then transitions into kneeing Strong in the head, and they end up with like a big forearm exchange in the center. Danielson hits a roaring forearm right into a dragon suplex, right into the chicken wing, and there's a big pop when Strong makes the rope there. Then, more big spots. Danielson's eye seems to have a cut above it. Strong hits a super double knees off the top rope, which I think is one of the big spots he used right before he made Gibson tap out in their match. And at that point, Cruz announces that there's only 5 minutes left in the time limit, and we get the "This is awesome" chant at this point. Strong locks in the stronghold. The crowd's going nuts. Danielson reverses it into a deep cradle and gets the sudden win. And I think even though the crowd was rooting for Strong, unlike in their previous 2 matches, the crowd actually popped for this finish, whereas in their last 2 matches, the finishes were both like so unusual that the crowd actually booed. This time the crowd popped. I thought the match was epic. I think it's one of the best ROH title matches in a really long time. I still say it's Danielson's second best match up to this point in his title reign. And listen, I think considering the length, the crowd was hot here. Like, I think to me, this is an underrated gem of a match. People don't talk about it enough. I really love it. I loved it when I first saw it. I haven't seen it in many, many years, and to me it held up because I think it told a good story, and it was just very entertaining the whole way through. I think they were really impressive that they were able to do this with such a late crowd and such a long show. And, I believe Danielson when he says he saw people leaving. It was a long show, but the people that stayed were into this match. I don't care what anyone says.
Let me preface this by saying I thought this was a great match. This is also my least favorite of the Danielson Strong trilogy. But I'm on the record as I'm a crazy person who's his favorite of the trilogy is the first match from This Means War. But again, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I have a personal kind of connection with that match. I think that's an important point in the career of one of my favorite wrestlers ever. And I love the way he realizes things in that match. Anyway, but you can listen to that episode to hear me gush about that match. But I thought this was a great match. But the one thing I would say is, well, I can say a lot of things, but I feel like the other 2 matches had their own vibe that comes just from the way those 2 work against each other, where this match, it still has a lot of that same vibe, but it also just kind of feels like a 60-minute match. You kind of touched on this a little bit where like there are like the stalling and stuff, and I'm not even hating the stalling, but I just feel like there are certain things that are smart to do in a 60-minute match that you kind of almost have to do to pace the match out both for the fans and for your own cardio. And in a way, it kind of makes a lot of 60-minute matches feel kind of similar. And so rather than feel like, like the evolution of these 2 guys, it's more like, it's their version of a 60-minute match, even though it wasn't quite 60 minutes. But like, for example, I can give examples of, first off, like you mentioned, Brian kind of clearly taking any kind of example he has to like stall or introduce something new. So like he doesn't do it too much, but like, the walking to the back when he gets into it with a fan, or even the Bob Backlund stuff. Like it almost reminds you of like the Joe Punk matches where we covered on those in their shoot interview Samoa Joe and CM Punk did together. They mentioned like that second hour-long draw. Like they were so grateful whenever some fan did something they could riff on. It was just like, oh, like we're running out of ideas. Like anything we can riff on to help us stretch this out is good. But more than that, it was just like the pacing right from the start. You can tell it's going to be very long, or even like normally matches have this certain structure, right? Where it's slow beginning, and then you kind of go to this mid-tier offense, and then you go to the final hot section at the end. And, you kind of, with a 60-minute match, you kind of have a problem, because it's the idea of, all right, if you want to just stretch out all three sections of the match, you might have like a 30-minute slow beginning, which you're just going to lose the crowd, so you can't do that. But at the same time, if you just do like a 10-minute slow beginning, you can't do like 50 minutes of really hot action, because you'll burn out the crowd and you just don't have that in you. And I think what these guys do is something I've seen in other 60-minute matches, which is incredibly smart. But again, it's something I've seen in a lot of 60-minute matches where if you watch this match, Danielson and Strong will do the slow beginning, and then the match starts to build up, and then Strong hurts his knee at some point in the match. And so that allows Danielson to kind of slow it back down again for a while by working on just the knee. Then the match builds back up again. Then Strong hurts his hand chopping the post, and that allows Danielson to slow it back down again for just a little while with the stuff like tap out to a wrist lock and stuff. So it's a very smart way of, it's like, we have excuses to bring the match down for a little bit just to kind of extend the match. And I think this match is really good. You watch this match, about doing what I've seen in other good long matches, the rhythm of slow, and then we do a spot to kind of wake you up a bit, and then slow. And this match is fun the whole way through, but like they're good about, like Roderick Strong, they do not hold back on the chops. He chops, like you mentioned, Danielson very early on the match, one chop, and it's already like a handprint on Danielson's chest and stuff like that. Like they're good about, they don't save every big move for the very end. Like Danielson's doing the flying top rope headbutt, I think like 30 minutes into a nearly hour-long match. So I think they do a good job of kind of spacing everything out. So you always get these little bumps up to kind of keep the crowd engaged over this long match. But I just think the other two matches were better. One thing I do disagree with you with, well, maybe not disagree, but you thought this was a lot more even for Strong and Danielson. I still felt like maybe this was Strong's most competitive match, but I still felt like Danielson ate him up a bit, like particularly at the end, where this is kind of weird to say, but for a 56-minute match, I actually felt like they could have given Strong like another 1 or 2 minutes of near falls, because I felt like right near the end, the crowd was really going pretty damn hot. They had reached like the high point of the match, and I felt like the crowd would have gone nuts for another minute. Like I felt like Strong could have done more, could have hit another minute of near falls, and they did, and that brings me to one of my other kind of quibbles with this match, which is the whole story of this match is like Danielson said in the book, and like the newsletters would say, this match was supposed to educate the fans that a match could go close to 60 minutes but not be a draw, which on the surface is a really smart idea, knowing especially, and Gabe probably had this in his head this time, that Danielson would be going to 3 60-minute draws later in the year. The idea of we need a match like this to kind of teach the fans that like just because a match goes 50 minutes or more doesn't mean you're not going to see a finish. We need a match like this. That's very smart. Doing it on this night, and I agree with you that Danielson greatly oversold how not into it the crowd was, because they were into it I thought surprisingly for a crowd this late in the night after seeing this much wrestling. But part of me wonders, like, again, thinking back to comparing this to Joe and Punk's trilogy, I know Joe and Punk's whole thing was the idea of everyone in the third match thinks we're going to go long, like 60 minutes or more. So instead we're going to go half that, like we're going to go do like a sprint. And part of me wonders if on this particular night, with the crowd that had been up that late, and knowing how hot the crowd was for the key moments of this match, like, is there an alternate world where these guys just go 20 minutes and just go balls to the wall, and it's just the crowd goes away going, especially because I feel like this was, and another thing you kind of touched on, which is I think this was a crowd on this night that did think Strong could win. Like the crowd's chanting at the start of the match, like next world champ for Strong. They're really buying into the near falls in a way that they haven't for a lot of Danielson title defenses so far. Like I feel like if you just did 20 minutes and just did hot near falls for like the last 6 or 7, you could have just had a crowd being molten hot thinking, oh shit, like Strong's going to win tonight. And you get some of that here. But instead, you're getting this match that it's 50 minutes starting at midnight, 56 minutes, because you just decided this has to be the night we teach fans that, it's not always a draw. But all of that to say, this match is great, and I think it's great for the same reasons those other matches were great. I just happen to think those matches were better. I think Danielson, I think he was even on a new high in terms of his personality. There's something about wrestling Roderick Strong where Danielson is never a bigger prick and never more of a bully and more kind of dominant than when he wrestles Strong, unless it's like a low-level guy or Jack Evans. Like there's something about Strong that just brings it out about Danielson. I don't know. One other thing I'd like to mention is if they were going for this idea of let's make people think it's a 60-minute draw, but then not be, I wish they would have done the time cues every 10 minutes. To the best of my hearing, they only do the time cue for the final 5 minutes. And it's like, you could say, oh, the time cues tip people off that's going to be a long match or a draw. But it's like, that was kind of the point of this match. And the way they wrestled to me early on from the first few minutes, you knew this match was going to go long. So why not do that? And also, why not do it right to the last minute? Like, for more drama, you could have wrestled this. They were already wrestling 56 minutes. Why not add an extra 3 minutes and wrestle in like a 1 minute count in the final countdown? Have Danielson, no pun intended, win. I think that would have been neat. Overall, though, I thought this was a great match. But for me, I know my ranking would be completely different. I think the matches aren't. I would rank them in chronological order. The first match is the best. Second match is the second best. Third match is the third. And I know you just basically just said Vendetta. The second match is the best. Then this second, then the first match worse. But you can't go wrong with any of these matches, I don't think.
Yeah, like, so for some of like your quibbles, I guess what I would say is, as far as like, what if they had done the sprint instead? It's like, well, they were trying to educate, like you said, and like, I guess the reason why I wouldn't agree with you is because this worked, like it did educate the crowd, and like it got over. This match was great as it was. So like, I don't think it needed those real improvements, I guess is what I would say. I guess the other big disagreement I would have with you, I really don't think Danielson ate up Strong. I think Strong looks stronger, no pun intended, in this match than he did in the other ones. And I think he came away better for it. And I also don't think that the stalling was that much. Like there were a few like obvious moments of stalling that I mentioned. But I don't think they did a ton of stuff. It wasn't like that first Joe versus Punk match where it was like, all right, they're just having some fun out there to kill time. It was much more like the second Joe versus Punk match, not in terms necessarily as good, but in terms of like the amount of stalling they did. Which, Joe Punk 2 had some, but just wasn't as over the top and obvious.
No, and I agree that they didn't have a ton of stalling here. I was just more putting that in to kind of back up my point of the idea of there's a lot of things you see in a 60-minute match that kind of all, like a lot of 60-minute matches feel the same in certain ways, and that's one of them. Not that just that, but like the pacing stuff I talked about. But again, I think all that stuff is really smart, and I think these guys do it as well as about anyone can do it. Like I thought even the stalling they did was fun, and with even like the little Backlund stuff was fun, which I wouldn't even really call stalling necessarily, but like, or even like the other ways I talked about where you could slow the match down. I thought Danielson does that really, really well. But
that Backlund thing is something that Danielson would have done in a 20-minute match,
Yeah. No, you're right.
The other question I have for you is, all right, so I see that we have different orders of the Strong Danielson matches. Here's my question. Off the top of your head, because I know, we don't always remember everything. Off the top of your head, is there a Danielson title defense prior to March 31st, 2006 that you thought was better than this particular match, besides the Strong matches?
My memory's so bad, but I don't think so, because let's say, okay, the AJ Styles match not as good as this. The Chris Hero match not as good as this. Austin Aries match, not as good as this.
Raven, Shelley. I mean,
Shelley, not as good as this. I wouldn't say even the Marufuji match is as good as this.
I'd say Rave was probably be one of my favorite non-strong title defenses, and I don't think it was as good as this.
I would go with you. I would rank these as the top 3, and then Rave number 4. I would say.
Yeah, at least off the top of my head. So far. Yeah.
Yes.
Of what we've seen so far, the title reign has a long way to go.
Yeah, there's everything here, like all of Danielson's title defenses have been at least pretty darn good. But yeah, like stuff like Sabin or Steve Corino, like it's not on the level of any of these. Like, right. No, I completely agree there.
Strong was definitely like the top opponent of Danielson during the first half of his title reign by far.
I mean, I think there's also a reason people kind of remember. Like, I think people will pick their favorite of the latter two. Like, I think I'm on a limb on saying the first one's the best. But like, I think there's a reason people kind of think of these matches as kind of like a collective chunk, just because the quality across all of them was so good.
Yeah,
where it's almost like
they had great chemistry.
Yeah, like you don't like one doesn't stick out even in the sense of like the Joe Punk matches where like the second two are clearly on a level above the others. You could say that about these, I think a lot of people would, but I think there's less of a differentiator just because it's just such a good stretch from the very first time they wrestled in a big singles match all the way through the trilogy. These guys just had chemistry right from the get-go. And
it'll be fun to watch Danielson now transition to his next top rival, which is going to be Nigel McGuinness.
Yeah, that is some of my favorite stuff. But the Observer, Dave wrote in praising this match, Ring of Honor is still a niche product in that you could not successfully start your main event at 11:45 p.m. after going nearly 4 hours on the show, and then start slow and build to a 56-minute main event with very few leaving and everyone into it by the end. So there you got Dave even disagreeing with Danielson. Well, we've established before, Matt, that Danielson's memory in the book isn't like we've caught a couple, like, not that he's intending to lie, but I know there's been a couple dates or details that he's like we've caught that have not been correct. So maybe his memory is just, how wrestlers can be hard on themselves. It's like he saw 3 people walk to the back outside. He's like, oh shit, they're all leaving. Because yeah. I agree that I think he greatly overstated that.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to ask someone who was there. But yeah, I mean, it didn't seem, I mean, it certainly wasn't obvious that the crowd was thinning out. I'm sure some people left. It was late, but like, I doubt that it was an overwhelming amount of people.
So Meltzer continues, I think as an idea, it's a bad one, even though doing the long match, even though the Bryan Danielson versus Roderick Strong match was 4.25 stars and technically excellent, but they are very lucky that they have the audience they do, because most crowds would have gone home. So, and then...
But they do have the audience that they do, so it's not a bad idea.
And the other thing we should mention too, like you mentioned, is Danielson really did get beat up in this match with the chops, and then he got the bloody mouth, and then the cut near his eye. And Dave in the Observer says Bryan Danielson's chest was blistered from all the Roderick Strong chops. He also suffered a black eye in that match, so that'll be something to look out for the next night. Because I forget, like, does he have like a noticeable black eye against Lance Storm? I guess we'll have to see.
Yeah, he has another big match right the next day, and so does Strong. It's crazy.
Yeah, and Matt, here comes my Wade thing. It's not the biggest thing, but it's one of those Wade things where it's just one of those things that makes you go, huh? So this is Wade on Bryan Danielson. Wade Keller goes, Bryan Danielson doesn't do moves and holds. He does one long complex move / hold. And it's like...
No, not true. He does moves and holds.
He does a lot of moves.
Yeah. Well, like I said about Wade, analysis, no matter what you think of, agree or not, it's always weird.
Yeah, like that's why I would say you could actually probably better apply that to, like, say, a Zack Sabre Jr. today, because he chains so much together, right? So you can say, okay, he's like going from one thing to the other. Danielson is a wrestler. He does moves and holds.
He did an atomic drop, did a bunch of suplexes.
Yeah.
Does a roaring forearm. Yeah, does a lot of moves.
The entire match was the atomic drop match.
One really long, slow atomic drop. Very impressive.
At one point in the commentary during this match, Gabe interrupted to announce that Lance Storm will be wrestling the winner of this match tomorrow night. So, which I'm just pointing out because that will come into play in a few moments, but they're acting like they just booked the Lance Storm match in the middle of this match. Let me just see. I'm just looking through my notes. Did I miss anything else? You mentioned the Bob Backlund stuff. That was great. Blah, blah, blah. No. No, we covered everything. So finally,
Yeah, I love that you're so thorough, Trevor. Like, wait, is there any other spot that I didn't mention in the match that we just
anything
spent 25
notable,
minutes
gotta
talking
give these
about?
guys their due.
Okay.
After the match, Prazak talks about how it's 12:45 a.m. and these fans just saw nearly 5 hours of wrestling, which I wrote in my notes about. In 2022, that seems quaint. Like, not that that still wouldn't be a long show or a late night today, but I mean, Matt, I think you would know as well as anybody, like, wrestling shows these days can go long and go late. Like,
especially if the show is called WrestleMania or the company is called AEW. Those shows can go extremely long.
But I think that's another sign of the times because, like, back then, like, a show going 4 hours or longer, other than if unless it was like IWA Mid-South, people were like, holy crap, like, this is too long, this is insane. And nowadays, like, people, for a huge show, like 5 hours, people are just like, yeah, this is long, but like, it happens.
But people do, I mean, listen, people still complain that those are too long.
They complain, but they don't act like this is some crazy new, like, it happens enough now that people are just like, well, I guess this is going to happen, like, settle in.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, this was a Friday rather than a Saturday, which means a lot of people came from work, which means that people are more tired. Like, on a Saturday night, it's less crazy than on a Friday night. And obviously, like, I was at Grand Slam 2022 just a week before recording this, or a couple weeks before recording this. And, yeah, that show went incredibly late on a weeknight, and it was very, very hard. It's very tiring. I had been up since, like, 6:30 in the morning. And the show ended at 12:30. And so I'm just picturing it. And like that show, they did a pretty good job of like keeping the crowd into it throughout like the second, taping. But, they didn't have a big like time main event that they had to get into the ring. And I don't know that they could have had a crowd even as hot as this ROH crowd for an hour long main event. It was impressive that Danielson and Strong were able to do that.
Absolutely, I agree. I was just going to mention, I know on the An Honorable Mention podcast episode they did on this show, they mentioned that the people in charge of the building that typically clean up after the shows they were suggesting that maybe they were getting a little frustrated that the show was going into 1 a.m. because they still had to wait around to clean up the show after it was done.
Yeah, it sucks for the people that work there, obviously, for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, a lot of fans stick around to clap and watch Brian and Roderick shake hands, which Brian does after some hesitancy. But you can also see a bunch of people making an immediate beeline to get the hell out of there because it's later and the show has been so long. So I would say, actually, again, I don't know. It's hard for me to tell. We don't get a great shot of everyone in the crowd. But it seemed like a lot of people stick around, but it definitely did seem like it was one of those shows where the second the match is over, probably a third of the crowd or half of the crowd, it seemed like everyone except in the first few rows was like, we need to get the fuck out of here. Like, it's late.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't want to. We don't want to fall asleep on the drive home. Yeah.
Yeah, to me that was the one negative was the final image in the ring is like the house lights are immediately on because they're probably like, get those house lights on. We got to clean this shit up. You can just see people streaming out as like Brian and Rod are trying to do this great, like, you've earned my respect finally moment. And you can just see people just forming lines to get the hell out of there. But, next, we go to Lance Storm somewhere where he congratulates Brian on winning another one. Storm says he's here to win the Ring of Honor title, and he's been training for 10 months for this one match.
And yet he waited for the day before to decide he actually wanted to do it.
Exactly. All the Ring of Honor storylines has been like Storm's on the fence and watching Ring of Honor. He's slowly getting won over, and Gabe's announcing during the middle of the main event that he's going to wrestle finally. And then Lance Storm's here is just like, yeah, I've been training for this match for 10 months. Like,
it's interesting because like if you watch the short promos that he cut on Best in the World, Dragon Gate Challenge, and this, I think he shot all those promos like just like in sequential order right at the same time.
The same spot, same clothes. He's clearly they asked him cut like 5 of these. And
which is like cut like, oh, I'm thinking about it. I'm really thinking about it. Oh, I'm doing it. Like that was it. Like, but also I've been training for 10 months just in case.
Like, that would even mean that predates, like, when you think about the promo that started this all when Lance Storm came out for that one show and then Danielson got into the in-ring thing. Yeah, I mean, even that show was not 10 months. And the whole thrust of that was Lance Storm going out of his way to be like, I don't know if I'll ever wrestle again, but if I did, maybe you'd be the guy.
Yeah, that was just 3 months earlier.
Yeah. And
4 months, I guess. But
for 10 months.
Yeah.
So the storyline is Lance Storm's an awful liar. That's what we're getting. And then finally, on our last segment, we cut to Dave Prazak backstage where he's found Colt Cabana. Prazak says he's never seen Colt like this. Colt just mutters, "Homicide, it's gotta end." And he walks away as Prazak calls after him. We get our usual for the Milestone Series to be continued graphic. That is the end of the show. That was Supercard of Honor, which was, again, like probably 4.25 hours of pro wrestling. Basically a regular length show with an entire almost hour-long match added to it. Matt, it's always hard to kind of review, I find, shows that are 4-something hours because, like, the quality varies a bit more. Like, this is, let's go out without saying, it's a must-watch show. It is one of the most important shows in Ring of Honor history, one of the biggest shows they ever ran of the Gabe era, of the Silken era. You know, one of the most important matches and another great match on top of that. All sets the WrestleMania weekend trend, all sorts of things. But if we just talk about, like, watching it from the ground up, there's some good stuff on there's a lot of good stuff on the show, but there are, like, for a 4.25 hour watch, like, there are moments where you'll be like, that didn't have to be on the show. Like the whole opening cornet stuff, or like it is not a perfect show. There's a world where they edited this down to 3 hours where maybe it's a perfect show, but it is still a great show that's a must watch, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, when you say must watch, like, does everyone who puts it on need to watch the whole thing? Like, no. You know, you really, like, there's 3 things on it that I would say are must watch or close to it, which are the Generation Next tag team match, the Do Fixer Blood Generation match, and the main event.
And the First Blood match.
Yeah, and the main event. There's other stuff you could enjoy watching, right? Like the First Blood match, and and the Joe 3-way, and maybe even the Embassy match if you liked it. But there is definitely some filler on there. There's some boring stuff. There's that opening promo which I thought was pretty rotten. So it's not perfect. It actually reminds me, more than any other show we've done, of like a modern age AEW pay-per-view that goes forever, where it's like, there's down points of this, there's up points, but like at the end, there's at least a couple things on that show that are just like so freaking fantastic that you're like, this was worth spending the time to watch. And this was, I think, that on another level in terms of, I think just 2 absolutely incredible matches, one being like one of the most influential matches in modern history. And so, like, yeah, it's a special show. It clearly started a trend. And, it'll be interesting to see the next night's version, which has the bigger crowd, the more tightly packed with big matches, I would say, more blow-offs, probably a hotter crowd because it's Saturday. But without those like 2 all-time epics that you got here. So it's that'll definitely be an interesting comparison.
Yeah, that'll be really exciting. And so for plugs, we got throughtheyears@gmail.com. That is our email if you want to reach us, ThROH. We are also on YouTube if that's the way you want to listen to the show. We have a thread on the Pro Wrestling Only Plugs forum. Our Twitter would be @TrevorDame is my Twitter, and @MayorMGF for Matt is his Twitter. Next time on the show, we will be covering Better Than Our Best, the final third of the triple shot. The title tells you what Ring of Honor thinks of it. It is remembered as one of the greatest Ring of Honor shows in history. Lance Storm versus Bryan Danielson, more Dragon Gate involvement, the end finally of the Homicide Colt Cabana feud. Tons of stuff on that show. It's going to be another. We're just in the streak where it's just big show after big show. This is the days of milk and honey for Through the Years. So until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.